The French Open champion for the first time, and we move from Paris to Montreal now because the live sport continues. Coming up next, commentary of the Canadian Grand Prix. If qualifying was anything to go by, should be a thriller. We've got Britain George Russell on pole, and Rosanna Tennant, I'm going to pass the Five Live Sport baton over to you.
Thank you very much. Yes, welcome to Montreal. We're moments away from lights out for the Canadian Grand Prix. As you say, George Russell, the Mercedes driver, on pole position, his first since 2022. It's a huge moment for him and a huge moment for Mercedes. Lining up alongside him will be Max Verstappen in the Red Bull. And let me tell you, it is wet and wild out there. There's a lot of standing water on the track. It has just started raining again. This is going to be an interesting start to the race. Who knows what might happen after that? But at the moment, we've got lots of unpredictability coming our way. I'm Rosanna Tennant down in the pits, and joining me in the commentary box is our lead commentator Harry Benjamin, European Sports Car champion Alex Brundle, and the BBC's F1 correspondent Andrew Benson. Guys, moments away from the race start now. People running around like headless chickens with umbrellas, tents, people slushing water off the pit wall covers. This is going to be a really interesting start to the Canadian Grand Prix for 2024.
It's going to be exciting. It is unpredictable. This is how the grid lines up. It's George Russell in the Mercedes on pole position. Alongside him will be Max Verstappen. Lando Norris in the McLaren starts third. It's an all McLaren row 2 with Piastri just behind. Ricciardo is fifth ahead of Alonso. Hamilton seventh. Tsunoda eighth. Stroll and Albon round out the top 10. Then it's Charles Leclerc outside of the top 10 in 11th, along with his teammate Carlos Sainz behind in 12th. Sargent is 13th. Magnussen, Gasly the top 15. Then it's Perez, Hulkenberg and Ocon the top 18.
On the sail of rain coming, should last for around 10 to 15 minutes.
With more rain on the way, 18 drivers on the grid, 2 going from the pit lane after power unit changes and rear wing changes for both Saubers, Valtteri Bottas and Zhou Guanyu. Formation lap then nearly coming to an end, Alex Brundle, as this is going to go anyway. We have no idea.
It really is. Rain coming down, 2 drivers in the field. Both Hasses have gone for the extreme wet tyre. Everybody else on the intermediate tyre in what is a sopping wet grid. And the rain continuing to fall. There is standing water now gathering on the surface. Track conditions deteriorating all the time. Both Saubers pulling out of their garage to form up for their pit lane start. But it's going to be all action, isn't it? Down to that tight, tricky left-hander and then right of turn 1 in incredibly treacherous conditions, Harry.
Wherever you're listening to this from, I hope you've got a comfortable seat. The Canadian Grand Prix is just seconds away. 4.3 kilometres this track, just over 2.7 miles, 14 turns, 6 to the left and 8 to the right as all the cars line up on the grid. At the back it will be Hulkenberg and Ocon. Bottas and Zhou go from the pit lane. The green light comes on at the end and it is almost time to go. It is George Russell on pole position. It's all eyes to the lights and foot to the floor as we go racing in Canada. It's a tensive start as the rain is coming down. The track absolutely soaking, but Russell heading into turn 1, the left-hander ahead of Max Verstappen. Lando Norris slots in behind and they're all taking it very easy through turns 1 and 2, but it's a nice, clean and steady start from our pole sitter George Russell that you cannot see a thing. The spray coming off the back of these cars, proving visibility almost impossible for those behind.
Tippy toe, a word too extreme for the start of this race. They are so delicately making it through the middle sector, but it's relatively well status quo. Lewis Hamilton looks to have made up potentially a couple of positions in the middle of the pack up to 6th place, and but it's George Russell who still leads in the first of the Mercedes as they go side by side then through the middle sector.
Yeah, Ricciardo's lost position, so too have Tsunoda. The RB struggling with their race starts. That proving true once again as Lando Norris almost loses the rear end of his McLaren coming through the left-hander of turn 9 as they then approach the braking zone of the hairpin. Turn 10, 180 degrees, right hand. George Russell leading them away, and as he feathers the throttle, the rear end of of that Mercedes kicking out as it gets quite dicey further back between a Ferrari and a Haas coming into the hairpin. The Ferrari having to run a little bit deep to avoid any contact and manages to make his way through. Sainz has had a terrible start. He's all the way down in 14th. Teammate Leclerc has made up one position into 10th. Side by side, though, coming down the long back straight is the Haas on the inside of the Aston Martin as the Ferrari goes straight on. It's Magnussen in 8th, Stroll in 9th, and then Charles Leclerc, who just straight-lined the final chicane, holds on to 10th, but now he's got Tsunoda all over the back of him. Lap 2 starts.
Yeah, Leclerc just missed his braking point for the final chicane. Now under pressure again from Tsunoda as they make their way down into that first sector once more. Difficult conditions for both Ferraris, who look to be really struggling for grip.
Magnussen is absolutely flying on those wet weather tyres. He's up to 7th at the moment and making his way up through the field. It's Russell who leads Verstappen, Norris, Piastri, the top 4 as they started. Alonso up to 5th. Then comes Hamilton ahead of Magnussen. Ricciardo down to 8th. Stroll is 9th. Leclerc rounds out the top 10. Then it's Tsunoda in 11th ahead of Hülkenberg. Albon, Sargent, Sainz with a poor start down to 15th. Ocon, Perez losing positions as well. He's down to 17th ahead of Gasly and the 2 Saubers who started from the pit lane as Magnussen continues to make moves through the field on that full wet tyre, blasts past Lewis Hamilton and now sets his sights on Fernando Alonso's 5th place.
The extreme wet tyre working beautifully for both Hasses. Hülkenberg up 5 positions from his starting spot. Magnussen now inside the top 6.
So this level of rain is the worst we expect.
That's Russell's radio. Rain, the worst they could expect these conditions right now. And on that extreme wet tyre is Kevin Magnussen, who now gets alongside down the inside of Fernando Alonso's Aston Martin and makes it look easy into the final chicane. And Magnussen, Rosanna, now up to 5th. He's flying in the Haas.
Absolutely. Talk about making hay while the rain falls. When I spoke to James Vowles, the team principal of Williams, he said he didn't regret putting his drivers on the intermediate, Alex Albon and Logan Sargent. Well, Alex Albon has lost 3 places from the start. He's down in P13. Meanwhile, the 2 full wet runners, Kevin Magnussen and Nico Hülkenberg, are having an absolutely brilliant time. But as we just heard on the radio, the Mercedes radio, this is the heaviest it's going to be. So it is important for Magnussen and Hülkenberg to take this opportunity now, make up as many places as possible, because it could start to play against them once the rain eases up.
Absolutely. Lap 3 of 70. It's Russell who leads Verstappen, Norris, Piastri, Magnussen. That is the top 5.
Yeah, it's one thing we do know about that extreme wet tyre is that as soon as the track begins to dry at all, everything falls apart on it, and the intermediate will be the tyre to be on. Haas is starring in this early stage, and now it's Kevin Magnussen putting pressure on the second McLaren of Oscar Piastri as they make their way through the middle sector. But the question is, how long can they run on that tyre for? Well, for the moment, they've got so much more confidence, specifically on the brakes and over the standing water.
Hamilton runs deep, coming into the hairpin, chasing Fernando Alonso for 6th place. He manages to rejoin behind Alonso as Magnussen picks off the McLaren of Piastri down the back straight. Magnussen is absolutely clawing his way through the field on that full wet tyre. So too is his teammate Nico Hülkenberg, who's just got in front of Daniel Ricciardo for 8th position. Hülkenberg's next target will be Lewis Hamilton. Last lap around, George Russell set a 1:36.3, but the fastest lap right now goes to Kevin Magnussen, a 1:36.1. Magnussen could find himself leading this race.
Yeah, race leading pace at the moment for both of those Hasses. Gasly and Perez obviously made contact in turn 2. That was what our brief yellow flag was for on the opening lap. There'll be no further investigation with regards to that. It's so interesting at this stage. If you're Norris, if you're Piastri, how hard do you fight Magnussen, knowing this is lap 4 of 70, and surely things are going to come back towards you as the race continues on. We're listening in to Nico Hülkenberg, who's not able at the moment to make quite the progress of his teammate, sitting in 8th position, staring at the gearbox of the second Mercedes of Lewis Hamilton.
The question will be, though, is how long will this advantage last for the 2 Haas drivers?
We are seeing something strange engine side, and we're looking at it. Keep pushing.
That's Brian Bozzi on the radio to Charles Leclerc. Something strange on the engine side. He's actually fallen outside of the top 10 now. He's back to where he started in 11th. The two Ferraris having a torrid time out there in these opening stages for the Canadian Grand Prix. Leclerc in 11th, Sainz down into 14th. It's Russell who leads, just over 3 seconds between him and Max Verstappen. Then it's Lando Norris. Then comes Kevin Magnussen in the Haas. Oscar Piastri is 5th ahead of Alonso, Hamilton, Hülkenberg, Ricciardo and Stroll. That is your top 10. They are the current point scorers. But with a bit of rain coming down at the start of this race, having rained all day so far, there is blue sky peeking out from behind the clouds that overlook this circuit Gilles Villeneuve on the Ile Notre Dame Island here in Montreal. It's lap 5 of 70 for the Canadian Grand Prix. Alex Brundle, what do Haas do here? Do they just go as long as they can and then hope for the best? Here's Leclerc first.
Is everything okay on the engine? There are weird things in exits.
No, it's not, but we keep pushing. We have issues on the engine, but keep pushing.
Well, you can search Ferrari on the internet. You'll find them at nowhere.com at the moment. They are absolutely miles off the pace, 3-4 seconds off the pace of the leading cars. The answer to your question, Harry, for Haas is keep going as long as you can. You have absolutely no idea what the conditions are going to do next. Try to get as far up the road as you possibly can, because you never know when this thing might potentially be red flagged. Give you a free tyre choice and you can jump to that track position, or indeed when you can make the call and improve to a different tyre. So track position and time are everything at this stage. Kevin Magnussen 4/10 clear of George Russell, who leads the race last time around. A starring performance for Haas. How long can it last?
Absolutely. Well, George Russell doing all he needed to do at the start of this race. It didn't start under safety car, which we're all pleased about. We got a standing start and it was quite tentative, but Russell holding on to the lead on lap 6 of 70. It's Russell, Verstappen, Norris, Magnussen, Piastri, the top 5. Indeed, Verstappen actually has just taken the fastest lap as he cuts across the line. We'll see what Magnussen does on the full wet tyre. A reminder, the two Haas drivers are the only ones on the extreme wet. Everybody else in the field is on the intermediate tyre. That's the more common one you'll see used during wet weather conditions. But the Haas cars taking a gamble, and in these early stages, due to the conditions on track being so wet, it's working for them. But how long will it work for? That's the question. Magnussen 4th, Hülkenberg in 8th, right behind Hamilton. Leclerc on the radio.
People on Inters now going faster than people on X-Wet.
And just as that moment came through, I saw Kevin Magnussen snake around through the exit of the slow right-hander of turn 2 with a rear tyre starting to move around on the tread block underneath him. We've been hearing team bosses and engineers say that the wet tyre is better when there's a lot of standing water on the racetrack. As soon as there isn't, the intermediate is better. Well, that was a quick party, but maybe the party's over for both Haas cars. Yellow flag now in sector 2. Let's see how quickly that's cleared up.
It's Sargent who has found the wall, but he's reversing, and that is in turn 6. So he's gone straight on where you should arc to your left. He has managed to get going. He was touching the wall, but I think he's managed to stop before any heavy damage, because there's nothing visible to the front nose of that Williams as he rejoins the circuit.
No, just a bump into the wall, and he's continued. Fastest lap of the race this time around has gone to Max Verstappen, who's improving now and homing in slightly on George Russell. 2/10 a lap that time around. One of the Aston Martins long, Harry.
I think it's Fernando Alonso who's had to cut the chicane at the end of the lap. That allows Hamilton to get right up towards the rear end of Alonso, then to the side, but doesn't quite have the speed, and he locks up. Hamilton goes straight on at turn 1. He can't get it turned in. He cuts the corner, rejoins, but he'll have to give it back to Alonso, who will sweep round, but Alonso's struggling for grip on the exit as well, and nearly has a massive moment. Alonso loses the rear end, but just about holds it. That would have been scary for Fernando Alonso and Hamilton, who got a grade A view of it, but Alonso back in front of Hamilton in 6th, Hamilton 7th, Hülkenberg still behind them on that extreme wet tyre in 8th.
For a moment there, Fernando Alonso's Aston Martin pointing at 45 degrees in the wrong direction towards the outside wall of turn 2. Lewis Hamilton now looking in the middle sector.
How much am I losing down the straight?
Quite a bit, but keep pushing.
I don't want this answer. When I'm asking, please tell me.
Half a second.
Clear operations wanted from Charles Leclerc, clear communication wanted from Charles Leclerc from his new engineer over the last couple of races, Brian Bozzi. Leclerc with engine issues, struggling down in 11th. That's where he started this race. Carlos Sainz with a tough start as well, down in 14th. It's lap 8 of 70. George Russell leads Verstappen, Norris, Magnussen and Piastri, the top 5. Rosanna.
Yeah, and it's now not raining anymore as the Haas car comes into the pits to change tyres. That's Kevin Magnussen, those full wet tyres off, and they're putting on the intermediates. The difference between these tyres, and it's a slow stop, bouncing the wheel on the front right. The mechanic had a bit of trouble with that. He bangs the floor with his fist. So a slow stop for Haas. That is so disappointing after all of the ground that they had made up. The difference between these tyres, if you're wondering, the full wet tyre shifts 65 litres per second at full speed. The intermediate shifts 25 litres per second at full speed. So that's the kind of difference between these tyres, dealing with these conditions. But it is now the intermediate tyre for Kevin Magnussen after a slow and disappointing stop. He's down in P14.
Yeah, 8.6 seconds, that stop, an eternity in Formula One. And I wonder if they were actually ready for him, if it was a last-minute decision for Magnussen to come in. We'll talk more on that, though. But just getting a little look, Alex, at the start of this race again.
Max Verstappen with the initial launch, and actually it's George Russell in the Mercedes leading the field, came across to take the line for turn 1. Verstappen forced to adjust the angle of his Red Bull, which cost him a lot of traction. Then they were full tippy-toe through the apex of turn 2, where there was a lot of standing water to move out of the way for the cars. But the field so tentative on what effectively, as we've seen from both Haas's, was the wrong tyre in the short term, but the right tyre in the long term. And that's significant contact then between Perez and the Alpine down in the first corner.
This is the sound with Perez, and the view, well, I can tell you, there is not a lot. You see some of the red flashing lights from the car in front of the Haas, and as he makes his way through the right-hander of 2, just gets squeezed and pincered by the Alpine, who also had nowhere to go. The Alpine then side on, almost a T-bone effect. The Alpine carries on, so does Perez, but both getting some contact and damage. Sargent also off at turn 1.
Yeah, Sargent nearly hit me, jump in the truck. You need to be more careful when you're redoing it. Copy it.
So that was Carlos Sainz on the radio. There's not all well at Ferrari at the moment.
No, they're not very happy down there, are they? And perhaps a bit of an understanding as to why they were losing so much straight line speed through qualifying quite clearly. Difficulty with engine settings or engine issues. You're listening into Logan Sargent, and we're reviewing that moment where he found the wall incredibly gently earlier on in the race. He looks like he's been off again and back onto the track in front of Carlos Sainz, which led to the radio message you just heard.
Sunshine is really starting to come out now over this circuit. Gilles Villeneuve. Still Nico Hülkenberg in the Haas, who has stayed out on the extreme wet tyre. Everybody else now on that intermediate tyre. Kevin Magnussen in the Haas came into the pits to switch out after a slow stop. He's now down in 14th and back out on the intermediate tyres. It's lap 9 of 70. It's George Russell who leads this race from Max Verstappen. The gap just over 1.7 seconds. Then it's Norris, Piastri, Alonso, the top 5.
Impossible to overtake with these issues together.
I know.
As Leclerc struggles with engine issues outside of the top 10. Hamilton is 6th ahead of Hülkenberg. Ricciardo, Stroll, Leclerc in 10th. Tsunoda is 11th ahead of Albon, Sainz, Magnussen, Ocon in 15th. Then it's Perez. Gasly is 17th in front of the 2 Saubers, and Logan Sargent 20th and last in the Williams.
Daniel Ricciardo has been noted for a potential false start, just to cover off race control news of late. That's not an investigation yet. It's only been noted. We'll hear about it again if Ricciardo's going to get any type of penalty. Situation as it stands, Hülkenberg the only driver remaining on the extreme wet tyre. Requirements in terms of pit stops now, there are none. They can do exactly what they want and run on the best possible tyre for them. Now through to the end of the Grand Prix, you're listening in to Max Verstappen, who's making his way through turn 10, where I can just start to see the coloration of the tarmac through the wet conditions here. There is a dry line beginning to form, train tracks on the motorway for them down towards the final corner.
Lap 10 of 70. Russell, 1.3 seconds is the gap between himself and Max Verstappen. Verstappen is closing in on George Russell. The dry line is developing. Then the question will be is when does that crossover come? Because offline, you only get that small narrow track of a drying piece, a drying racing line. You dip one wheel off of it and you're still in full wet mode.
Yeah, certainly. And then when you box for that slick tyre, who are you going to be boxing back into is another question. There will be a crossover point where the slick is just far too quick for the intermediate. We've seen, though, this intermediate run so long into dry conditions. So we'll see who's going to jump first, who's going to believe that they're going to get tyre temperature. And tyre temperature is the only thing you need to try to hoover over those wet patches. I don't think it's quite ready yet, but we're not far away.
Not far at all. Just to let you know, that incident right at the start of the race between Sergio Perez and the Alpine, it was the Alpine of Pierre Gasly who had the contact with him, and that full start investigation that you mentioned about Daniel Ricciardo's RB has now been elevated to being under investigation. So Ricciardo, who sits in 8th, is actually in a big old train of cars right now behind Nico Hülkenberg on the extreme wet tyre. Hülkenberg in 7th now, just clinging on that extreme wet. It's now not really fit for purpose as he dips off of the racing line, trying to find the wetter parts of the track, because he's got Ricciardo, Stroll, Leclerc, Tsunoda, Albon all behind him, vying for that 7th spot. Andrew.
So at the front, Harry, Verstappen is really beginning to put the pressure on Russell. The gap in the last few laps come down like this: 2.9, 2.7, 2.4, 2.0, 1.7, 1.3, and it's now 1.2. So Verstappen's on the march in that Red Bull. Here he is on the radio.
Max, weather update, heads up. Expecting a short rain cell, duration 5 minutes, in around 15 laps.
So what they've got to do here is try to keep some kind of intermediate tyres. We see then Hülkenberg start to slip backwards through the field.
Yeah, it is the RB of Daniel Ricciardo who sweeps round the outside through the chicane. Hülkenberg on that extreme wet tyre. Everybody else on the intermediate tyre, but now it is starting to dry out. It's the intermediate tyre that you need to be on. Hülkenberg, both Haas drivers hedging their bets on the extreme wet at the start of this race, and it proving fruitful. Magnussen getting into the top 4, but then Magnussen bailed out early. He's now on the intermediate tyre again. He's back down to 14th place. Hülkenberg, though, sticking with it, hoping for a bit more rain if it intensifies, but he's falling down through the field now. Stroll's just got through the Canadian on home soil in the Aston Martin, now up to 8th. Hülkenberg down to 9th. Leclerc will be next up to try and pick that 9th position off, but Leclerc with engine issues. At the top of the field, though, Alex, the gap is now within a second between George Russell and Max Verstappen.
Max Verstappen then moving on to the wetter part of the racetrack on that final straight down towards the final chicane to try and keep the tyre just a little bit cooler. If there is another rain cell coming for these drivers, they need to try to keep these intermediate tyres in good nick, because there's nothing worse than trying to engage with rain on a worn out Inter. They'll all be considering that a factor as they move on, but definitely Russell now under significant pressure and in the firing line. This is going to be a battle for the lead in the next couple of laps.
Last lap around for George Russell was a 1:29.4.
George expecting another rain shower 20 minutes from now.
Just tell me what you didn't like me to do then. These tires are going to wear very quick.
So just be careful not to tear the Inter.
So Russell's saying these tyres are going to wear very quickly. The team responding, they just don't want them to tear the tyres. He doesn't want to take too much out of it, Andrew, as Hülkenberg comes into the pits to get rid of his extreme wets for the intermediate tyre.
It's already a battle for the lead, Harry. Verstappen is right up behind George Russell as they approach the hairpin. They've got the long straight after that, of course. And these two are in a complete race of their own at the moment. Lando Norris in 3rd place is 7 seconds behind. What's going to happen running down to the end of this lap?
Well, he's just fallen outside of a second as Russell searches for the wetter patch of rubber. So too does Verstappen into the braking zone for the final chicane. Verstappen closes up. The battle for the lead is well and truly on. And I'll tell you what, they've dropped the rest of the field. It's at 6.5 seconds between Verstappen and Lando Norris in 3rd. The battle for the lead is on. It's Russell versus Verstappen. Then comes Norris, Piastri, Alonso 5th, having a good battle with Hamilton for 6th.
Yeah, Hamilton right in the wheel tracks of Alonso. They're both trying to jostle over that dry bit of track. Nothing doing for Lewis Hamilton bottom this time into turns 13 and 14. But out front, only half a second between Verstappen and Russell. So much discussion before the race about the graining potential of this Inter.
I think it will probably be slicks within 20 minutes.
Yeah, that's exactly when the rain's expected to hit.
This is worst case scenario in terms of a tyre decision for these two leaders, because exactly as they've damaged the Inter beyond repair, it's going to be asked to deal with wet weather once more. Who could be in the hot seat again if they manage to keep decent pace are the two Haas cars, who have of course newer Inters with sharper edges and be better in those wet conditions. That is, if they don't run to full slick here. But I'm seeing a full dry line now, Harry. I think the next couple of laps really, with hot Formula One cars, of course, venturiing the water off the surface of the racetrack, are going to be delivering what could be a slick racetrack within 2 or 3 laps.
What do you mean by venturing?
They kind of suck the water off the track.
There you go. It is drying. The dry line is really coming to fruition now into the chicane. Verstappen closes up to the back of George Russell as they begin lap 15 of 70. Both pulling out to try and find the wetter tarmac. Rain expected, more of it in about 18 minutes.
So just remember, there's no DRS at the moment. So although Verstappen's really close behind Russell, he's not getting that gain.
Russell has had a bad entry into turn 2, and Verstappen is all over the back of him. Russell just struggling with the rear end, struggling for grip, struggling for power to get out of turn 2 as he rises up through the hill, then downhill through 3 and 4. Verstappen all over the back of him in the Red Bull. It arcs to the right through turn 5, hit the brakes for turn 6 into the left-hander. Can Russell get it stopped? He's sliding. That Mercedes looks like it is an absolute handful right now. The Red Bull looks like the more comfortable car on the circuit.
Russell's lost control of the rear tyre, so as he goes through those wetter parts of the racetrack, it starts to cool for him. Verstappen, though, has it right under control. Lando Norris behind, interestingly, in the McLaren, has just lit the blue touch paper. Fastest lap of the race so far. Behind this battle, they're all closing in on Russell. Norris 3.8 seconds back. The immediate issue for Russell, though, is Verstappen, who appears to have so much pace, managing the car through the exit of turn 10 for yet another go as he heads down towards turn 1, 2 and 3.
You're listening to live coverage of the Canadian Grand Prix. That was the voice of the European Sports Car Champion Alex Brundle alongside myself, Harry Benjamin. We've got the BBC's F1 correspondent Andrew Benson, and down in the paddock is Rosanna Tennant. It's lap 15 soon to become lap 16 of 70 here in Montreal at the Circuit Gilles Villeneuve. And after a wet start to this race, well, the race is well and truly on still for the lead. Starting to dry out now. A dry line is well and truly clear, but with more rain expected imminently. The cars all on intermediate tyres, which they started this race on, just starting to wear out. Will they wear out in time too quickly before the next patch of rain? 4/10 separate George Russell and Max Verstappen for the lead, with Lando Norris closing in rapidly in the McLaren in third.
You've got huge gaps through the field here, so they're unlikely to get traffic whenever they box. That's not the factor. The factor is how long will this intermediate tyre go? Over the last lap, I've seen George moving out onto those wetter parts of the track in a straight line, and he appears to have sorted the rear tyre out and started to move away slightly from Verstappen. How hard do they dare push with more rain in about 15 minutes time? Will they have to pit again if there's rain for a sharper set of Inters? They'll be desperate not to and lose track position.
It will be a waiting game. It is a race that will be won and lost not only on track but also on the pit wall. The strategists working hard to try and determine how the remainder of this race will unfold. Through the chicane once more that finishes the lap. The wall of champions to the driver's right. Verstappen just losing the rear a little bit. Gets a snap on the steering wheel. Holds it firm. Crosses the line for lap 17. It's Russell. Verstappen. Norris crosses the line. Sets the fastest lap. Lando Norris continuing to find the pace. But Verstappen gets it wrong in turn 1, has to cut across turn 2, rejoins in a clunky manner. Norris now right on the rear end of Max Verstappen's Red Bull. Verstappen losing over a second to Russell in that mistake.
And Norris a second clear of that. Norris 26.5 last time around, 28.1 for Max Verstappen. He's flying in the McLaren for some reason at this stage. Listening in to Max Verstappen, who just locks the brakes, does he? No, just wonders the car wide, taking too much speed through the left-hander of the first corner, and then finds himself under massive pressure from Lando Norris through the exit, who clouts then the curb through turns 3 and 4, now pressurising the Red Bull of Max Verstappen as we go back to live sound.
Russell leads Verstappen now with that mistake. 3 seconds that's given Russell a buffer, a little bit of breathing room, but you have to say Russell absolutely soaking up the pressure from Verstappen behind. Verstappen now has to look in his mirrors a little bit more because Norris is within a second. A reminder, DRS, the drag reduction system, the flap in the rear wing that opens to give you a little bit of boost of power in a straight line when you're within a second of the car, is not yet activated because we started this race under wet conditions and it has not been declared a dry race yet. Russell first, Verstappen second, Norris third, then it's Piastri, Alonso in fifth, still battling with Hamilton, about 6 tenths between those two. Ricciardo is seventh, and Ricciardo has been given a 5-second time penalty, just for your information, for his start, getting a false start in this race in the RB, so that will come later in the pits. Pain for Ricciardo. Stroll, Leclerc, Tsunoda, the top 10. They are your point scorers so far.
Intermediate tyres, both a treaded compound and also a softer compound. That's why you're seeing these drivers drive all over the wet stuff in a straight line to try to keep the tread, the surface temperature of that tyre under control. The better they can do that, the more they can increase the longevity of this intermediate tyre onto when we're expecting potential rain later on in the race. It's Max Verstappen now who's finding himself a little bit under pressure for Lando Norris. Oscar Piastri has now lit the touch paper behind and is delivering the same pace as Norris could a few laps ago. Both McLarens deciding to go at this stage of the race.
I mentioned DRS wasn't yet active. It now is enabled because the rear wing flap is open on the McLaren of Lando Norris, who is hunting down Max Verstappen, who will not get the DRS effect. He's 2 seconds behind George Russell. You've got to be within a second of the car in front to activate it in the designated zones. Enabled. Russell leads this race, 1.8 seconds. Then it's Verstappen. Norris with DRS down into turn 1, the left-hander chasing Verstappen. This is where Verstappen made the mistake 1 lap ago. This time much cleaner from Verstappen, but it's tough to get the power and the grip behind you as you head slightly uphill out of turn 2. But not only is Norris flying, so too is Oscar Piastri. The Australian in the other McLaren could well join this party shortly.
These intermediate tyres have got one big push in them, haven't they? You can see it, and they swallow about a 5-second gap when the drivers go for it. We've just seen Norris do it. Now we're seeing Piastri do it. Fastest lap of the race last time around, 25.9, placed 27s for race leader George Russell. That's what the tyre can do, and that's how much they're managing it. But when they get up to the gearbox of the car ahead, they're struggling with that tyre temperature. It's all a case of when you decide to go and how much you want to use of that tyre, which is going to damage it for later on in the stint and give you issues.
Norris still closing up to the back of Verstappen. Norris just chasing down that long back straight which runs parallel with the rowing lake that runs alongside. Norris closing and closing, trying to find the wetter patches of the tarmac. Verstappen keeping him at bay. Norris isn't quite able to close in at this stage. Through the chicane they go, the wall of champions to driver's right, now down the start-finish straight across the line to start lap 20 of 70. Norris yet to find a way through while they continue this battle. Elsewhere on 5 Sports Extra, we've got continued coverage of the T20 Cricket World Cup. Simon Mann.
150 for 7 Oman made in their 20 overs. They took 15 off the final over, so a challenging total for Scotland, who need to win this match and win it as quickly as they possibly can as well to try to shut out England in this group. Atavali making 54 and Ayan Khan 41 not out for Oman. The wickets spread around for Scotland. They need 151 to win.
Thanks, Simon. Live ball-by-ball commentary of Oman against Scotland over on 5 Sports Extra here on BBC Radio 5 Live, though. You're listening to live coverage of the Canadian Grand Prix. It's lap 20 of 70 in a wet Canadian Grand Prix here in Montreal at the Circuit Gilles Villeneuve. A wet start, but now it is starting to dry out, but with more rain within 10 minutes of arrival. and there are battles all throughout the field. Russell now has a bit more, well, there's a battle basically for the top 3 positions. Russell ahead of Verstappen, who is having to defend left, right and centre from Lando Norris, who down the back straight with DRS moves to the outside and gets the position. Norris into the braking zone for the chicane and up into second place in this race, to the cheers and roars of the McLaren garage. Norris up into second, Verstappen down to third.
And Norris picks up DRS again, which launches him off towards George Russell and prevents Max Verstappen coming back at him through the exit of the final chicane. It definitely looks like the McLarens that are able to put the power down at the moment. It's a long run then down to that final chicane. Norris forced to look to the outside by Max Verstappen, but eventually had too much grip, had too much traction out of the turn 10 hairpin, and had too much speed for Verstappen down that long back straight. Norris on Russell coming next.
Norris could find himself in the lead of this race in just a couple of corners time, because Russell is struggling in that Mercedes to keep the power down. Russell leads though, Norris right behind him as they snake their way through the right left of turns 8 and 9, taking you slightly uphill. Then the short squirt towards the hairpin, the right-hander 180 degrees to the right. Norris has a little look, doesn't make it too obvious though, just sneaks in behind. Russell holds the position. Now down the back straight, that dry line really starting to get wider and wider as both cars searching from one extreme left to the other extreme right to try and find that wet stuff that still remains. Norris goes up to the side of Russell and goes through on Russell. Russell has to abort the chicane. Lando Norris leads the Canadian Grand Prix, and Russell, when he rejoins the track, almost takes out Max Verstappen. They just avoid each other. Verstappen though gets through and is up into second. Russell, who started the race on pole, led away so brilliantly, now down to third. It's Norris who leads ahead of Verstappen, Russell in third.
Lightning reactions from Max Verstappen as George Russell, forced to cut across the chicane of turn 13 and 14, comes back onto the racetrack and straight back to the racing line, forcing Verstappen to cut to the inside. Lando Norris with the same move, copy and paste in the McLaren. Russell tried to stay with him on the brakes, but was unable to do so, and Verstappen had to arc the Red Bull across the road in order to defend not only his position on track, but also from damage to his car.
Oh, that was a little bit of a moment there, but it's Lando Norris now then who leads the Canadian Grand Prix from Max Verstappen, George Russell, Oscar Piastri and Fernando Alonso, the top 5. Then comes Hamilton, Ricciardo, Stroll, Albon, Tsunoda, the top 10. That rounds out the point scorers. The 2 Ferraris struggling, Charles Leclerc with engine problems in 11th ahead of his teammate. Then comes Magnussen. Then it's the 2 Alpines of Ocon and Gasly in 14th and 15th. Perez still down in 16th, cannot find his way through the field in the other Red Bull. Bottas, who started from the pit lane, is 17th. Hulkenberg, who stayed out much longer than his teammate on the extreme wet tyre, finally caved in and is now on the intermediate tyre, but he's all the way down in 18th ahead of Zhou Guanyu in the other Sauber, and Logan Sargent 20th and last. Still all 20 drivers in this race, which has been absolute chaos since the start, but it's been beautiful chaos.
Russell versus Verstappen incident has been noted for rejoining unsafely. Lewis Hamilton having a look at the rear of Fernando Alonso. But I just think I'd point out, Harry, Norris has been released at the front of the field. 24.4 last time around as Lewis Hamilton looks up the inside of turn 2. Nothing doing though on the Aston Martin of Fernando Alonso.
These 2 former teammates, world champions, fighting over 5th and 6th, both with a Mercedes power unit in the back. Alonso in the Aston Martin, Hamilton in the Mercedes, trying to find his way through, almost making contact with the Spaniard coming through the right-hander of turn 2. Up at the front of the field, Norris is absolutely flying. He's just found over 2 seconds compared to Verstappen behind. The gap now is 5 seconds between Norris and Verstappen. These conditions, McLaren and Lando Norris loving every minute.
But how long will these conditions last, Harry? Remember that rain we were talking about? It's still coming, and the teams and drivers and the organisation are telling us it's coming in 3 minutes. This one has another sting. We're only at lap 20 44 of 70, still expecting that big rain cloud. And just as I say that, I can see the vista over the circuit Gilles Villeneuve start to darken. When will this rain come?
Well, it should be fairly imminently, but you look up to the sky and there are still bits of blue sky and white puffy clouds. Hamilton coming out of the chicane, losing the rear end, keeps it planted, gets the DRS as well, searching for the wetter patches of tarmac to try and keep these intermediate tyres alive as the track begins to really dry out. This, the battle between 5th and 6th place. Alonso ahead of Hamilton, Andrew Benson.
And Harry, Oscar Piastri has closed right up on George Russell in 3rd place. Now third place they're battling for is less than a second behind, while Norris stretches his lead at the front over Verstappen.
I'd say not so much that Piastri's closed up on Russell, but Russell's definitely fallen back towards Piastri, really starting to struggle now, George Russell, in terms of his performance through the race. I mean, Lando Norris out front, 25 last time around. George Russell at least 1.5 seconds slower than that. Piastri matching towards half a second his teammate out in front of the field.
But Russell's not really any slower than Verstappen. It's the McLarens that are really flying at the moment, Alex, isn't it, in these conditions? And you've got all in one shot, actually, now we've got Verstappen, Russell and Piastri. So, goodness me, the way these things are going at the moment, it could even be a McLaren 1-2.
A McLaren 1-2, is that on the cards? Piastri currently in 4th in the second McLaren, closing up, under braking into turn 1 through the left-hander, right behind the rear wing of the Mercedes of George Russell, who started this race on pole position but has now fallen down into 3rd. It's Norris who leads by now almost 8 seconds from Verstappen, and we got a car off, yellow flags, and it's one of the Williams. We're just trying to figure out which one it is. Logan Sargent, who's facing backwards on the exit of turn 4. He's made contact somewhere with the wall, but that will surely bring out some kind of safety car if he can't get that back pointing the right way and driving. Yellow flag, no overtaking can occur in that part of the circuit. It's Norris now with over almost 11 seconds between himself and Verstappen. Russell, Piastri and Alonso the top 5.
He's definitely got damage to the rear wing there, Sargent, but the question is there damage to the suspension? Can he spin that round and continue? The leaders continue to battle down towards turn 10. We've still got a yellow flag out in sector 1, and if Sargent can't move that car, we will have a safety car, which we do now have.
Safety car deployed, then everybody has to slow down to the Delta as Sargent, then that is his day done. The American in his 2nd season with Williams, and increasingly the likelihood of him being shown the door from that team at the end of the year is getting higher and higher, with the likes of Carlos Sainz on the market. A crash in a race with mixed conditions where a big result could be on the cards is done, and the safety car is out. What does that mean? Pit stops are happening. Verstappen in, Russell in, Piastri in. Norris stays out. He stayed out. He had over 11 seconds, but here we go then. Verstappen comes into the pits and is greeted by his mechanics, but it's a quicker stop from Russell ever so slightly. He gets out. I think Russell has had a great pit stop there. Verstappen almost having to come and carve him off at pit exit.
Critically though, it's new inters. Nobody moving to slicks in that pit stop phase, so they're all putting a new set of inters on in anticipation of the rain, which they still think is coming. Inters on for Lewis Hamilton as well, who's in and out of the pit stop. We've had Fernando Alonso in a 4.3 in and out as well. Lando Norris opting to stay on the same set of inters out front.
So Norris is now right up behind the safety car. Verstappen pitted, managed to stay out in front of Russell. Piastri behind them. I tell you what though, Hamilton managed to jump Fernando Alonso in the pits. Hamilton now into 5th, Alonso into 6th, as they will now carefully make their way through the yellow flag zone, which is in sector 1. It's because of the Williams of Logan Sargent, and we're about to see what happened, Alex Brundle.
Yeah, Logan Sargent is going to make his way through turns 3 and 4 and over the curb in the first part of 3, and just drops the rear on the throttle through the exit of 4. Clumsy for Logan Sargent, who had his best qualifying and first Q2 appearance of 2024 yesterday, but yeah, difficult moment for him. Catches the front wing as well on the wall as he makes his way through the exit. Just pure driver error there, taking his Williams off the curb and applying too much throttle through the exit. They've not done anything about moving that Williams yet, which is in a really difficult place there on the exit of turn 4. So we're looking at a relatively long safety car. We now have Lando Norris in the McLaren. Going to be interesting to see how this shakes out. They can't, of course, go absolutely flat out until they packed up to the safety car. There are earliest arrival times that the drivers have to adhere to. So it's going to be interesting to see if Lando Norris retains his lead ahead of drivers who have already pitted. It looks like not so.
No, Verstappen's through, so too does Russell, so too goes Piastri, but the way the pit lane feeds out, it comes out through turn 2, so actually Norris will just get ahead of his teammate Piastri, but Norris then staying out an extra lap compared to those behind him, was flying, now down to 3rd. Verstappen leads this race, Russell is 2nd, Norris 3rd, Piastri 4th.
Why didn't they box Norris? Perhaps not wanting to double stack the two McLarens, but surely then the driver leading on the road would take precedence on that. I wonder if he passed the pit lane when the safety car was deployed, and then RB coming in to pit road and choosing to serve Daniel Ricciardo's penalty, of course, for that jump start before they do the pit stop for his next set of inters.
Okay, it's lap 27 of 70 here at the Canadian Grand Prix. Currently under safety car conditions, Max Verstappen leads, Russell leads Norris. Let's get some more updates on the T20 Cricket World Cup. India, Pakistan, Dan Norcross.
57 for 2 at the halfway stage. Pakistan, they've just lost the second wicket on referral. Usman Khan, LBW to Akshar Patel, his first ball. At the moment, you would say Pakistan have got this under control, but we saw today India lost their last 7 wickets for 30 runs. It's not an easy pitch to bat on. 63 runs needed in just under 10 overs. Pakistan will be favourites, but they've got to win. How will the pressure play on them in this must-win game? 58 for 2 now after 10.2 overs.
Thanks, Dan. Not an easy pitch to bat on, and here in Canada, this is not an easy circuit to drive on right now in these conditions. You're listening to live coverage of the Canadian Grand Prix from Montreal at the circuit Gilles Villeneuve, a race that started in very wet conditions, but a standing start is what we got, and it was George Russell who led the way from pole, with Verstappen coming in to 2nd behind him, slotting into 2nd behind him. But as the line got drier, the racing line started to dry out more and more, then there was trouble. Then there were questions about how long can these intermediates last for, before we then saw Russell lose the lead, struggling in his Mercedes for grip. Verstappen was all over the back of him, but it was actually Lando Norris in the McLaren that was absolutely flying and was leading this race up until the safety car for the crash of the Williams of Logan Sargent. Norris opted to stay out an extra lap compared to Verstappen, Russell and his teammate Piastri, and as such pitted a lap later and lost position. It's now Verstappen who leads behind the safety car, Russell in 2nd, Norris came out 3rd ahead of Piastri, and Hamilton is now 5th, having jumped Alonso in the pits. I think that was the gist of it, Rosanna.
It certainly was, and Jean-Pierre Labiesi, Max Verstappen's race engineer, has been on the radio to Verstappen saying what goes around comes around. He then gave him the order of the drivers, but I guess they're referring to Miami, where of course Lando Norris benefited massively from the safety car, giving him that win back a couple of weeks ago. But yes, Max Verstappen leading this race. How things can change, so difficult, isn't it, to know when to come in, when to stay out, and of course if you miss that line, you are slightly hamstrung as well.
Yeah, several drivers who've chosen actually to stay out completely and thus gain a little bit of track position, but we'll have older inters when we go racing once more. Yuki Tsunoda staying out, sitting in 7th in his RB. Esteban Ocon also not pitting, and Valtteri Bottas, of course, started in the pit lane in his Sauber, currently sitting 13th and just outside the points, having opted not to pit as well in this safety car cycle. So not the full field coming in, but most of the runners and riders, it must be said, coming in for another set of inters. No sign of that rain yet that was coming in 3 minutes. I'm sure 3 minutes has been up by now.
Yeah, that 22 minutes seems an awful long time ago now, doesn't it? And now we're just getting another look at the race start, and we're actually seeing Daniel Ricciardo's view. Now, he was investigated and then given a penalty for essentially a false start. Let's listen.
So he's just rolling. He's rolling slightly.
And they're hotter on that now.
They sure are, after Lando Norris a few races back very much got away with it in essential terms. Now, if you are moving at all by GPS sensor, they would consider the start a false start, and they can use all cameras, including the onboard cameras, to determine if a driver is rolling. We've got Ferrari out in the pit lane.
Yeah, Ferrari are struggling as the safety car is coming in this lap. Is Leclerc coming in to retire? That they've changed the tyres. They've taken the intermediates off and they've put in the hard compound on, but he's just staying in his grid spot. We've heard on the radio already that he's got engine issues. He's not been happy in that Ferrari. Sainz too struggling down in 13th. Let's hear his radio.
Better to take risk because we 1.2 seconds off. We are not going to go anywhere.
Okay, well, they're not retiring, they're taking risks.
It was almost like he turned the engine off in the pit lane there, and it was almost like he stopped for a chat. He went to he would have gone to the back of the field anyway, having pitted at that point. So they put him on the hard tyre, and he kind of opened his visor and was looking down at the steering wheel, Charles Leclerc, really not happy at all behind the wheel of that Ferrari. They rolled the dice. They're the only car on the racetrack on a dry weather tyre. Let's see how that plays out for them to the end. Safety car will be ending this lap. The field will be under the control of Max Verstappen.
Bert Mailander in the Aston Martin safety car speeds away into the pit lane as the rain starts to come down. The rain that was promised has arrived as the Ferrari of Leclerc switches onto the dry tyres, but he's got nothing to lose. Struggling in this race anyway. The safety car makes it back, and we're about to go green flag racing once again in Montreal. It's Verstappen who leads Russell, Norris, Piastri, Hamilton, the top five. Verstappen weaving left, weaving right, waiting as late as possible before he gets this race restarted. It'll be up to him as to when he gets it back underway. There's the line comes before you can overtake through the chicane, the wall of champions to the right-hand side, and Verstappen puts his foot to the floor as we go racing once more in Canada. It's lap 30 of 70. Verstappen heads into turn one. Everybody on the intermediate tyre, with the exception of Charles Leclerc now at the back of the field on the hard compound. It's Verstappen who gets away well under the safety car restart.
Still visually a dry line on the road, but the rain is coming down relatively hard. It was a massive shimmy from Max Verstappen through the exit of the final turn. Leclerc being told on the radio that the team think they fixed the engine issue by power cycling the car in the pit lane. Won't help him much from 19th on the wrong tyre, but even still beneficial for him. Max Verstappen drawing out slightly, 0.8 seconds the gap as they head down into turn 6 and 7.
Yeah, and the rain is coming down at a fair rate of knots. Leclerc, who was on that hard compound tyre, the dry tyre, didn't have anything to lose. He's actually only just coming through turn 6 now, so I wonder if he even managed to catch up to the back of the pack in time post his late call into the pits. Into the hairpin we go. Verstappen still leads, just over half a second between himself and Russell. Leclerc on the radio.
Yeah, we've got the rain.
Copy. Just keep it on track. So 2 laps of rain and then it dries. Just keep it on track and then we'll go fast.
Okay, 2 laps of rain. He's got to just keep it out of the wall, Alex.
Yeah, but that is a very, very difficult ask when the walls are close around the circuit of Gilles Villeneuve, and he's going to lose massive time, Leclerc. Already 31 seconds back. They're really punting down at Ferrari. The rain coming down extremely hard here, and drivers now well into their intermediate tyre phase of running. Still line astern. Lando Norris with the fastest lap that time around, was super quick, actually behind the wheel of that McLaren, and just remember how quick they were in these conditions before the circuit went yellow.
Arcing their way through the right-hander of turn 5 goes Verstappen. He's actually just extended his gap to Russell a little bit, over a second now. Rosanna.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be a couple of laps that Charles Leclerc needs to keep his car on the road. This choice to go onto the hard tyre, I think it's going to be a very, very difficult one to follow through. He's so tentative through the first and second turns. It is very, very heavy, the rain now in the paddock. I don't think it's going anywhere either, because as I look up to the clouds, it's a huge grey cloud over the circuit, and it doesn't look like it's shifting very fast. So I think this rain is here to stay for some time yet.
I think I've just seen Charles Leclerc being overtaken by a groundhog, Rosanna, in turn 3. He is really struggling on those hard compound tyres.
Yeah, you wonder if he will come into the pits at some stage or just persevere with it as the other Ferrari, Carlos Sainz, into the braking zone of the hairpin, almost goes straight into the back of Valtteri Bottas, just manages to avoid the Sauber driver. They live to fight another day as the rain continues to pummel down in Montreal, and moves being made in the mid-pack as well, threading the needle. What a move from Alex Albon. First he picks off the RB of Daniel Ricciardo, and then he gets, is that the Alpine?
Of Ocon, yeah, all the way down the inside of that final chicane, listening to the replay of Alexander Albon, goes to the outside of Daniel Ricciardo, and he's just so much later on the brakes, he cuts to the inside of Esteban Ocon, who's massively tentative in the braking zone for turn 13 and 14. Albon puts the throttle on, can't believe the circuit's so open in front of him.
That was surely overtake of the year from Alex Albon. Fantastic work, gets the Williams car up into 9th at the moment. We're only on lap 32 of 70, and the way it's panned out so far, anything can happen in this Canadian Grand Prix, so prepare for absolutely everything to come at us. The rain still coming down now, having allowed the track previously to start to get drier. It's now getting wetter. Leclerc switched on to the hard compound tyres in the Ferrari, who'd been struggling. He was outside of the points. He put the dry hard compound tyre on, was absolutely nowhere, and he has indeed, Alex, called it quits and come into the pits to get rid of that hard tyre.
Well, they're going to put him on the intermediate. Sainz has another moment in the mid-pack. So close. He's really struggling to stop the car. And is there a little bit of front wing? Did he catch contact with the rear of Valtteri Bottas' Sauber? Looks like he did.
Right end plate flies off the Ferrari of Carlos Sainz. He's now under pressure from the Alpine of Pierre Gasly, who tries to slide down the inside, coming into the final chicane. Gasly can't do it as the Haas behind of Kevin Magnussen just decides to straight line the final chicane. It's the Sauber of Bottas in 12th, Sainz in 13th, with now damage to his front wing, and Gasly behind in 14th.
Bottas, of course, one of those drivers who chose not to pit and is now under pressure from those on a newer intermediate tyre. Tsunoda doing a brilliant job in the RB, still managing to keep pace up in the points and has vaulted up the order here. But Sainz needs to try to make this move if he's going to try to scrounge and scavenge any points from this Grand Prix. It looks like the functional plane of that front wing is okay. We're listening into him now. He's going to get really deep and just lose braking performance from the front axle. Almost like the brakes didn't perform for him there. Carbon brakes on these cars, of course, and they may well be cooling them for dry conditions here. A restart that we've just had. No braking effort at all there from the Ferrari, and he's lost a bit of his front wing as a consequence.
Verstappen leads this race, but only by just under a second to George Russell in the Mercedes. Norris with the fastest lap in the McLaren is third in front of his teammate Oscar Piastri. Hamilton rounds out the top 5 ahead of Alonso, Tsunoda, Stroll, Albon, Ocon into the top 10, and they are your current point scorers. Then it's Ricciardo, Bottas in 12th in front of Sainz with front wing damage. Gasly is 14th in front of Magnussen 15th. Sergio Perez has been absolutely nowhere in this race, has started 16th and still is in 16th in the other Red Bull, ahead of Joe Guan Yu in 17th. Nico Hülkenberg is 18th in front of Charles Leclerc, and Logan Sargent in the Williams, the only driver to retire from this race.
Decent amount of spray now coming off the back of the cars, so the rain has made significant impact on the circuit surface. They're back down in the 29, some 3 or 4 seconds slower than they were just before the yellow flag, just before that safety car came out. The McLaren's advantage much more slight than it was previously. Lando Norris subtly the quickest of the leading 4 drivers, but only just that time around, taking 3/10 out of George Russell and half a second out of Max Verstappen. 1.2 seconds the gap between Russell and Norris, probably the biggest fight in the top 3. We're listening in to Lance Stroll, who's now pressuring Yuki Tsunoda with a newer set of tyres underneath him in the Aston Martin.
Yep, Lance Stroll looking for a 4th point scoring Canadian Grand Prix, has finished in the points 3 times here, all of them a 9th place right now. Well, he'd better his record. He's currently in 8th and hunting down the Japanese driver in front of him, Yuki Tsunoda in the RB, fresh from extending his contract with that RB team with Red Bull for another year. But Stroll is closing in. A reminder, DRS was disabled a few laps ago due to the wet weather conditions increasing, so they will not get that benefit. As Stroll coming into the final chicane but can't get it turned in, he cuts the chicane, and so too does Alex Albon behind him. That's all in the battle for 7th, 8th and 9th. Further back up the field, it's Verstappen who leads now by over a second. Russell is second. Norris is third. Piastri is fourth. And closing in on his teammate Lando Norris.
Sainz has been noted for that collision with Valtteri Bottas down towards turn 10. It was Lewis Hamilton last time around who put in the quickest lap of the top 5 drivers and has been doing so for several laps now. 0.9 behind Oscar Piastri, a time which would normally have relevance if DRS was activated, but it was disabled, as you say, a few moments ago. Lewis Hamilton trying to make hay now in a Mercedes that's looked so strong all weekend long, was ruining his performance in qualifying. Thought he could have been up there with his teammate George Russell. Guess what, Harry? We've made it to half distance. Goodness me, there's been plenty of action, hasn't there, in the first 35 of 70 laps so far.
Absolutely, there has been, as the conditions continue to change all the time. Let's get a check-in elsewhere, though, on 5 Sports Extra. We've got coverage of the T20 World Cup cricket coverage. Scotland into bats against Oman. Charlie Taylor.
Well, we've got a game on our hands here. Oman posted 150 for 7, which is their highest total in their 3rd game of this World Cup. Scotland have just lost a wicket. Oman have managed to do what England couldn't do in that rained-off affair. They've taken a Scottish wicket. The score is 21 now for 1. So Scotland already losing one of their openers. Jones has gone 21 for 1. Oman look up for this. Scotland need to win to keep alive their hopes. And if they do win, it makes it much harder for England to qualify from this group as well. So a lot will depend on the next 17 overs here. Commentary available on BBC Sounds.
Thanks, Charlie. Yeah, live ball-by-ball commentary of that game on BBC Sounds, and also available more T20 World Cup cricket coverage over on 5 Sports Extra. Right here on BBC Radio 5 Live, you're listening to coverage of the Canadian Grand Prix, and lap 36 of 70, and we've just gone over halfway distance, and we're still trying to find time to take a bit of a breath. It's Max Verstappen who leads by over 1.4 seconds to George Russell in second. Norris is third. Then comes Piastri and Hamilton, the top 5. Hamilton all over the back of the Australian in the McLaren. Alonso is 6th, Tsunoda 7th, Stroll is 8th, Albon 9th, and Ocon is 10th. That rounds out the point scoring places. We've had rain coming down in the last few laps or so. It's starting to abate, but it has made the track much wetter. Having started wet, began to dry out, and now with that additional rain, the conditions worsening once more. But with fresh intermediate tyres on for the majority of the field, with the exception of Tsunoda, Ocon and Sainz and Bottas, further down the field. All of them now fighting tooth and nail. Hamilton trying to find a way through past Piastri, but so far no luck.
A differential in performance on this set of intermediate tyres, and the switch over, Mercedes looking stronger, McLaren looking relatively weaker, could well be because they've had the opportunity to view the pressures of the tyres which were on at the start of the race, and of course put on potentially in a little bit of a rush. They may well have had a safety car start, so they would have had to run the extreme wets if they did so. They've seen how those pressures have developed through the race so far, and a chance to re-pressure the second set, which changes the relative performance of the various cars. Lewis Hamilton then taking off towards the 2 McLarens with the circuit as it is right now, but we know how strong they have been as the circuit starts to dry.
Verstappen starting to edge away from George Russell at the front of the field, almost 2.5 seconds. Let's check in with Rosanna Tennant, who's down in the paddock for us. Rosanna, what is the weather doing right now? It looks like it's starting to abate a bit.
Yeah, it has stopped raining. I thought you were going to say Rosanna Tennant, our weather forecaster.
Well,
yeah,
you nearly had me.
No rain down here in the paddock at the moment, Harry, but still large, dark grey clouds looming around the circuit Gilles Villeneuve. But it is starting to dry up, as you say. That'll be music to Alex Albon's ears. He's just been on the radio to his engineer, currently in P9. He's been bemoaning his front tyres, says they are so poor, they only work when the circuit is totally dry. So as it dries up, the track might start to come to Alex Albon and his intermediate tyres. P9 for the Williams driver at the moment, trying to make up places and further his chances of scoring bigger points this afternoon.
Yeah, fresh off the back of taking his first points this season for Williams is Alex Albon, hoping for another 9th place finish. Further back in the pack, we haven't really talked much about the second Red Bull of Sergio Perez. Was knocked out in the first part of qualifying yesterday, started 16th. Well, he's made up one position just now in the form of Kevin Magnussen. He's pipped the Danes' spots. So now Magnussen in the Haas down to 16th, Perez up into 15th, but this is not going to be a race to remember for Perez.
Yeah, after getting themselves some TV time as well earlier on in the Grand Prix, both Haas's find themselves relatively close to the rear of the field. Nico Hülkenberg, though, able to make a move for 17th place around the outside of the Sauber of Zhou Guanyu and move himself just a tiny bit closer to points.
That's the voice of the European sports car champion Alex Brundle, alongside myself, Harry Benjamin. Down in the paddock is Rosanna Tennant, and we're also joined by the BBC's F1 correspondent Andrew Benson.
So we've got a really interesting dynamic in this race at the moment. First of all, we've got the first 4 cars covered by 5 seconds, the first 5 cars covered by 6 seconds, but of course it's rained, and at the moment Verstappen has a very slight advantage over his pursuers. He's got a 2.4 second lead that he's eked out over George Russell, as you said, although Russell's just managed to stabilise that in the last couple of laps. But the question now is, with the rain stopping and the track beginning to dry again, do we see the same pattern of car performance as we saw in the first stint? Do we see the McLarens of Norris and Piastri start to come back at Verstappen and Russell? And they're doing so, if they do get that performance, they're doing so from much closer behind than they were in the first stint.
Of course, I'd like to throw you back to a comment Alex Albon made a few moments ago. The front tyre's really not working in those wetter conditions, and it depends what they've pressured the tyre for. The more pressure you put in, the better it is in the rain, as we see Carlos Sainz all over the road trying to hang on to his Ferrari. The lower pressure that you put in the tyre, the better it is in terms of its longevity in dry conditions. It really depends what gamble they've made with the pressure of the intermediate tyre as they run through this stint. There is absolutely no guarantee that we'll see the same thing play out again, and it certainly seems like Verstappen and Russell are relatively stronger in this stint, Andrew, and the two McLarens are relatively slower than the super quick pace we saw at the beginning.
At the moment, yes, but of course what we've got now is the slightly wetter conditions that we had earlier in the first stint. The question is, as you say, Alex, we don't know what the tyre pressures are, but the question is, what's going to happen as the track dries? Will we see the same performance pattern, or will we not? And the DRS has been enabled, by the way, so anyone who's within a second of somebody else has now got a chance to pass this. Russell's radio.
This is going to be turn 1 and 2 again. Still very wet, everywhere else is dry.
Yeah,
A-firm.
There are certain parts, that was George Russell's radio, certain parts of this track that are a lot wetter than other parts. Sainz displaying that through turns 1 and 2. He's had a woeful last lap, getting so crossed up through turns 1 and 2, and the second Haas almost losing the rear end through that turn 2, where it's just a little bit more wet. That was Nico Hülkenberg, the rear wing of the Haas, almost stepping round on him. He just about keeps it planted rally style, but these conditions proving tricky in some parts of the circuit, Alex. It looks like it could be ready for slicks.
Well, when Russell says it's going to be turn 1 and 2, what he means is that it's going to be turn 1 and 2 that prevent us jumping to the slick tyre. They're going to be the area of the circuit which remains wet, as we do see, Lando Norris start to match in to the times of George Russell ahead. The fastest car on track, though, of those leading, well, equal with Max Verstappen, still Lewis Hamilton, who's really found form at this stage of the race, relatively on as even. Hamilton then sets the fastest lap of that 4, and indeed the fastest lap of the race as he comes across the line this time. The track's starting to dry.
I tell you what, though, it still looks very dark and ominous. There's some very dark clouds surrounding this circuit, Gilles Villeneuve. So I wouldn't want to say that we have had all the rain just yet. Lap 41 of 70. Verstappen has 2.7 seconds over George Russell. Norris is 3rd, Piastri 4th, Hamilton in 5th. Alonso is 6th in front of Tsunoda, Stroll, Albon, Ocon. That's the top 10. Then comes Ricciardo, Bottas, Sainz, Perez. Magnussen is 15th ahead of Hülkenberg. Gasly has just come into the pits, and Zhou Guanyu's behind him. Then it's Charles Leclerc right at the back. No Logan Sargent, who has retired from this race, and Gasly has risked it. He's gone for it. He's put the dry tyre on. He's put the hard compounded tyre on, and as he comes out of the pit lane entry, which of course hasn't seen a lot of action, that part of the track is still very wet.
Gasly's rear tyres did double the distance of the chassis through the pit lane exit. So much was the wheel spin of the Alpine, and it's yellow flag down in sector 1, and I do wonder if that is the Alpine having a little bit of a moment. But the first to jump to slicks then will be Pierre Gasly. He's only done 14 laps on that set of inters. Interesting to see if anybody else follows suit. The rest of the pit wall will have their eyes trained on that Alpine on the timing screens to see what kind of performance he can find.
Gasly off the back of his first points of the season, courtesy of 10th place in Monaco a couple of weeks ago. and right at the back of that field, but it is those teams that will require those points. But off goes Lando Norris, cuts the corner at turn 1, loses positions. Piastri goes through, so too does Hamilton, and I think, or was it Piastri who went off the other McLaren? They've stabilised. It's Russell who goes through. Norris then managed to get back onto the track in 3rd. Piastri right behind him. Hamilton in 5th.
Yeah, absolutely. It's Norris who went off the track, passed George Russell while being off the track, and had to relieve the Mercedes back through. Still leads his teammate as they make their way down towards 6 and 7. But a very interesting moment then for Lando Norris, starting to struggle a little bit. And those two McLarens, even as the track dries, are still struggling for pace here in the top 4. Lando Norris just took too much speed in to that first corner, just in the way that we saw Max Verstappen do earlier on in the race, and had to let the Mercedes of George Russell back through on the exit.
Yeah, and Russell getting a huge slide as well on that Mercedes as he retook 2nd place. But now the gap between himself and Verstappen, who leads this race, almost at 4 seconds. Here is Russell on the radio.
I lost a lot of time from Norris. Avoiding action, 1.5 seconds.
He obviously heard me. That is why.
That was so Inspector George, wasn't it? Through the middle of turn 2, just trying to gather a potential penalty. Max Verstappen out front drops a 24.0 to extend a little bit of a gap there, and it's 4 seconds back for Russell then as a result of that issue, dropping away from Max Verstappen at the front of the field.
Yeah, I mean, he was, dobbing in George, but he's absolutely right. He did lose 1.5 seconds, and now that's, as you say, that's a big advantage for Verstappen, for everyone to try and claw back again now, especially against someone like Max Verstappen.
Action in the pit lane. Let's head down to Rosanna.
Charles Leclerc in the Ferrari has come in. He's taken his steering wheel out, taken his gloves off. They've put the car up on the skateboards and they've wheeled him back into the garage. So Charles Leclerc, the Ferrari, is out of the Canadian Grand Prix. Problems for the Scuderia this weekend.
Thanks, Rosanna. Yeah, Leclerc then out of the race, and that'll be his first retirement from a Grand Prix this season, fresh off the back of that emotional win in Monaco. Now out of this race here in Canada. Also worth noting a couple of pit stops in the last few moments, switching on to the dry tyres further back in the field. Valtteri Bottas on the mediums, and Kevin Magnussen also.
First lap of Pierre Gasly was a 27.1, so that was 3 seconds behind what the leaders are doing. We've got a Mercedes in the pit lane.
It's Lewis Hamilton who comes into the pits as he trundles down to 80 kilometres an hour, looks to hit his marks outside of his Mercedes garage. The mechanics wait, they go to work, a little bit of front wing change as well, and all 4 tyres are changed, the intermediates are off, and it's the slick tyres going on. It's the medium compound.
Red Bull out in the pit lane there. We saw in the background Daniel Ricciardo's in the pits, Sainz is in the pits, and Perez. So we've had several drivers in already. Bottas, Magnussen and Gasly all on a dry compound of tyre now.
So here we go then. These teams thinking, right, that might be it for the rain, or the track is just drying out to the point where it is now time for some dry tyre running. Cars coming in to switch onto those mediums. Hamilton's in, so too Ricciardo changed, Sainz, Perez, Bottas, Magnussen, Gasly all coming in, but the top 9 still yet to come into the pits. Let's see as they make their way down this long back straight which approaches the pit lane entry, what Verstappen, what Russell, what Norris, what Piastri do. Verstappen's just coming up to the entry of the pit lane now. We'll see if he does indeed come into the pits or he carries on going. They keep on going. They're not ready to come in.
There's a battle then between longevity and tyre warm-up. The medium compound tyre will obviously be much better as we've got Oscar Piastri in the second McLaren in the pit lane, but the longevity of the hard compound tyre will be better through to the end of the race. They'll definitely be able to get to the end on it. The medium tyre will be much quicker in these early laps. Piastri going for the mediums then in the McLaren. Alonso's in as well, so Stroll, Ocon and Albon.
Tsunoda too, who also didn't stop under the safety car with those intermediate tyre changes. So Tsunoda catapulting himself up the field, now coming in to switch off his tyres. Hamilton has just made his way through on all of those, so Hamilton now in 5th. It's Piastri who comes out in 4th. He is the first of those on the dry tyres. He's on the medium medium compound of tyres, so too is Hamilton, as Verstappen is told to pit.
Fastest man on track last time around, Pierre Gasly, on his warm set of hards. Now's the moment. This is the crossover.
Now is the time. It is time to get rid of your intermediate tyres, and for the top three in this race, they will all have to come into the pits at the end of this lap. Verstappen has been told to box. That means come into the pits. We want to change your tyres. Russell will no doubt follow him, as to will Lando Norris. They're all making their way now down the back straight. Verstappen comes peeling in. So too does Russell. But Lando Norris does not. He stays out and carries on for another lap.
Norris then going for an overcut and does not want to peel into the pit lane this time around. Lewis Hamilton is super quick on his way out of the pits on his set of medium compound tyres. Has managed to fire them up very quickly indeed. The leading runner on the medium compound now, Oscar Piastri, who these drivers will be comparing against as they come out of the pit lane. We can see him coming through the final chicane in the background, but Max Verstappen will come out well ahead of Piastri, having had to fight to build up temperature in the medium compound.
Yeah, Piastri making his way through the left-hander of turn one, which then becomes the right-hander of turn two. There'll be the slower Sauber of Zhou Guanyu just in front of him. Zhou Guanyu getting a huge swap on the front of his Sauber. Doesn't bother Oscar Piastri, who makes his way through on the car that is being lapped. But Norris then staying out on that intermediate tyre, has a 20-second gap to Verstappen. Then it's Russell and Piastri. They have all pitted for the dry compound of tyre.
And Lando Norris lighting up the timing screen on that Inter, has just been told he's under investigation for leaving the track and gaining an advantage over George Russell earlier on in the stint. Surely, though, we expect the McLaren of Norris in this time around, and after missing the pit lane early on, no, he continues on that set of intermediate tyres. After missing the pit lane earlier on underneath the safety car, Lando Norris is trying to run longer on the Inter and steal an advantage here in Montreal.
Nearly loses it as well, coming through the final chicane. The rear end completely stepping out on the back end of that McLaren. A reminder, if you come into the pits, it's usually about 19 seconds you will lose. At the moment, the gap between Norris and Verstappen is 20.8 seconds, but Norris feeling like he wants to stay out and carry on.
But Verstappen was way slower, as were the others on the slick tyre last time around, as they're trying to get it up to temperature. They have to spend a couple of laps building the temperature up before they can get up to racing speed. I think Norris should be okay to come back out in the lead here. Alexander Albon pulling up to try to make a move on Esteban Ocon, but no one dares jump off the wet line.
It'll be box this lap, give it everything.
That was Lando Norris on the radio. He has been told to come into the pits, having stayed out a couple of laps longer than Verstappen and Russell. Have McLaren and Norris played a blinder here? They managed to take the lead of this race earlier on due to their pure pace and just absolute flying through the field in these mixed conditions as it started to dry out. But then he stayed out a lap later, and that was to his detriment, and lost positions as the safety car came out. But Norris now into the pits, heading down to 80 kilometres an hour before he stops in his marks outside of his garage. He's greeted by his engineers. He hits his marks. 18 seconds the average time lost. He came in with just over 20 seconds. Norris should appear and take the lead of this race. Verstappen, though, is coming down the main straight, but the way the pit lane feeds out, you come out in turn two. Verstappen is coming through the left-hander of turn one as Norris comes out of the pit lane exit in the exit of turn two. Norris getting the power down, but he doesn't have the grip. He's on the wet line. He can't do it. Verstappen retakes the lead of this race. Norris out into second.
Pit lane wet, circuit is dry, and that was the difference. It was more than the normal time loss. Lando Norris then desperately trying to get the tyre up to temperature, and surely will we now be under pressure from George Russell and Oscar Piastri behind, who have operating temperature in their hard and soft tyres, hard and medium tyres respectively.
But as soon as he does get those tyres up to temperature, Lando Norris might well be on the hunt, because Piastri is right on the back of George Russell as well. That's over third and fourth. It's Verstappen who leads this race, 4 seconds to Norris. Then it's Russell, Piastri and Hamilton, the top five. Let's get a cricket T20 World Cup update. Prakash Rakankar.
Well, it's exciting here as well. India have picked up 2 late wickets just now, and in the 17th over, Pakistan are now 89 for 5. They need 31 of 20 balls. You'd still think they have the opportunity to win a rare game against India in the World Cup, but we've seen some close finishes.
Absolutely, close finishes all over the place in sport this afternoon, and that is live ball-by-ball commentary of the T20 World Cup cricket coverage over on 5 Sports Extra.
The ride is very, very bad. It's like a lock suspension again.
Understood. So that's Max Verstappen on the radio. What's he talking about there, Alex?
Yeah, here's the issue that they've been having with the Red Bull throughout the season so far. Lando Norris, we're listening into him on the exit of the pit lane, and just on the wet part of the track where the pit lane feeds in, of course, drivers required to stay to the left of the white line on pit exit. New slicks. They have been heated on pit road, but by the time they get to the end of the pit lane, they are stone cold and wet. I think McLaren just stayed out one lap too long there. They had a couple of seconds extra of gap, which Max Verstappen managed to heat his medium compound tyres and eat into on the final lap. They push, and Norris under pressure now from George Russell through the middle of turn 10.
Lock up into the hairpin for Norris. Russell right on the back of his British compatriot. Russell closing in down the back straight. Norris moves to the middle of the road, but Russell breezes past Lando. George Russell in the Mercedes gets up into second as they break to the final chicane. It's Russell in second, Norris down to third, and now his teammate Oscar Piastri all over the back of him as they run down into turn 1.
Fastest lap of the Grand Prix for Max Verstappen, ousted by George Russell, including the move on Lando Norris into the final chicane. So yeah, it's going to be an interesting battle to the end. 4.6 seconds back to Russell. Critically though, Russell on that hard tyre, everybody else in the leading 5.
Yeah, I can't touch any curbs. Almost knocks me out.
Okay. Everybody else in the leading 5 is on the medium compound. So what longevity will that hard tyre give George Russell through to the end of the race? That's the battle now, and he is homing in. Look, 3/10 on this lap alone. Make that 4 for George Russell on Max Verstappen. The Mercedes is catching the Red Bull.
Yep, last lap around for Verstappen, a 1:19.4. For Russell, a 1:19.3. He is closing, and they are on 2 different types of tyre. Verstappen on the medium compound, Russell on the hard compound.
Yeah, closing, Harry. He's hoovering road up, down into the 3s now for George Russell on Max Verstappen, who's complaining about the balance in that Red Bull, and having colder tyres will make it even more difficult with the issues that they've been having. A throwback throughout this weekend so far. We're so used to seeing that Red Bull as the class of the field, but it has been the Mercedes. Pole position in the hands of George Russell. That's been the quickest car here in dry conditions. We've still got a race on our hands.
Don't go anywhere. The Canadian Grand Prix has given us some absolutely thrilling action so far, and there is still a lot more to play out. Verstappen, Russell, Norris, Piastri all in the hunt here. It's Verstappen who leads ahead of Russell, Norris and Piastri. That's the top 4. Hamilton a couple of seconds back in 5th ahead of Alonso. Tsunoda is 7th ahead of Stroll. Ocon and Albon round out the top 10. Sainz in a miserable day for Ferrari so far is at 11th, and Russell comes through turns 8 and 9 but gets it all wrong, and Norris takes second place away as they break for the hairpin. Russell just going in a little bit too deep through 8 and 9. It's a quick right left, and that has cost Russell second place in this race.
And a huge moment for Russell as his tyres wet then, doesn't have performance through the next couple of turns. DRS will be open and put him back on the rear of Norris, and will he be able to have a go despite the issue for him through the mid-corner of turn 10? No. Disaster for George Russell, who looked for all the world like he was going to catch race leader Max Verstappen, until Lando Norris swooped in and took advantage of his mistake.
Flying over the curbs at the final chicane.
Focus, George, focus.
The reassuring voice of Toto Wolff, the team principal of Mercedes, just telling George Russell to focus. He's so far kept a cool, calm and collected head about him, had pole position, led from the start, lost the lead, but trying to regain it, and just a small mistake there, Alex.
Shimmy on the brakes, put him wide of the dry line, the single dry line, through the middle of turns 8 and 9, and that was all he needed to climb the curb, find himself on the wet part of the racetrack, and really begin to struggling as well, and appearing to lose time through that sequence of pit stops. Lewis Hamilton in the sister Mercedes is going very fast out there on the racetrack at the moment. 18 dead last time around, matching Max Verstappen at the front of the field, but appeared to lose out massively through the pit stops. 4.8 seconds back now off the cars that he was challenging before that round of stops.
Yellow flag out in sector 2, while Stroll has just gotten through on Tsunoda for 7th and 8th. Sainz has just gotten through on Albon for 10th spot. That yellow flag goes away now, so back to green flag racing. So we haven't seen what happened. Somebody might have just cut the corner somewhere. It's a bit more than that, though. It's Sergio Perez who has had contact somewhere, because his rear wing is half off his car. It has collapsed at the rear end and is being dragged along by the right rear tyre as he comes out of turns 8 and 9 and approaches the hairpin. Trouble then for the second Red Bull, who has had a miserable time so far. Qualified down in 16th, had managed to take off a few positions in front of him, but that'll be his race run.
Perez's rear wing looking like a Meccano set being dragged along the road behind the Red Bull. Will there be any debris out there on the racetrack that's going to require an intervention? We're listening into Oscar Piastri, who now is trying to pick up the pieces on George Russell, who appears to struggle more, and we can see there is a little bit of debris on the run down from turn 9 toward turn 10. May cause a virtual safety car, that one, if they have to run into the middle of the circuit and pick it up.
Norris is flying up in second, fastest lap, and he is dropping George Russell, who is under pressure from Oscar Piastri in the other McLaren now, the Australian. And there's another big incident involving the sole remaining Ferrari of Carlos Sainz, who tries to rejoin, and in doing so on the grass that is soaking wet is doing a pirouette, and he's going to get beached unless he can get it back onto the tarmac. It's also involving the Williams of Alex Albon. That's coming through turns 6 and 7. Sainz does get back onto the track and away again, but day done for Alex Albon, who is off onto the grass facing the wrong way, and it's safety car conditions once more.
Safety car deployed, lap 54 of 70 here in Montreal. Alexander Albon out of the race after what appears to be contact with Carlos Sainz. They were racing over position, and Alexander Albon makes his way out of the Williams. What do they now choose to do? They've only just changed tyres, around 8 or 9 laps on this set of tyres, depending on exactly when teams pitted. Sergio Perez returns to the pits and has retired the car after significant damage in the second Red Bull. Will anybody take this opportunity to jump for a tyre stop? I suspect not, and it's going to be a case of just deleting all of the gaps and going again. Let's have a look at it then. First of all, we're going to listen into Sergio Perez and see what's gone on with him, and he's just lost the car then down towards 5 and 6, and a straight rear impact into the barrier on the outside. Pure driver error. Found himself on the wet stuff, just as George Russell did, and has cost himself an incident. Pierre Gasly watched on as Sergio Perez went off all on his own on the wet part of the racetrack.
That was how Perez went off in that complex of corners. The left-hander of 6, which arcs into the right-hander of turn 7. That is where Sainz and Albon have also had an incident. We haven't yet seen how that one has played out, but we're about to as well. Safety car pit stops unfolding. Russell and Hamilton have both come into the pits, and Sainz lost it all on his own, coming onto the curb, and Albon, the innocent victim, trying to get out of the way. Sainz spinning around on the wet stuff. Albon had nowhere to go.
But if you listen into Sainz now,
Yeah, sorry for that.
I think he rotates the rear. He rotates. Lost control of the car, couldn't do anything. He rotates the rear into Alexander Albon, and Albon, despite taking evasive action, is caught by the right rear of Sainz as he spins, putting him out of the race.
Okay, in those last few moments, both Mercedes have decided to come into the pits. Russell coming out on the medium compounder tyre, Hamilton coming out on the hard compounder tyre, as Carlos Sainz is retired from this race. That is a double DNF for Ferrari. We've also lost Sergio Perez in the Red Bull. That is back-to-back retirements for the Mexican, and Alex Albon won't be able to follow up his point-scoring finish in Monaco. He is also out of this race. 15 cars remain in the Canadian Grand Prix. Andrew Benson.
So a couple of things to say here. First of all, Max Verstappen was on course to win that race because of that error by George Russell at turns 8 and 9. That gave him breathing space when Russell was closing him down. 5-second lead, 15 laps to go, whatever it was. Verstappen looked like he was quids in there, but now the safety car has given the McLarens the chance to close up behind, and the Mercedes, with Russell on fresh mediums and Hamilton on fresh hards, 10-lap fresher tyres, they're going to be a massive threat. And I'm actually surprised that more people didn't come in for fresh tyres under that safety car.
No, the Mercedes had a free pit stop, Andrew, because they had such a gap back to Alonso. So that's why they've chosen to do so, because they didn't lose any kind of track position whatsoever. Such was the gap back to Alonso in the Aston.
I get that, but what happens normally with safety cars, think back to Silverstone a couple of years ago, Ferrari left Charles Leclerc out because he was in the lead. Everyone else came in for fresh tyres, and he was a sitting duck in that race and ended up finishing 4th from the lead. That's just 10 laps is a big advantage for tyres, even on a low abrasion circuit like Montreal. I'm really interested to see whether Mercedes can make this work.
It's going to be hard to make the moves, though, isn't it? Because it's so wet offline that, well, we've just seen what can happen if you find yourself off the race line. So even if you've got a better tyre underneath you, it's going to be difficult to make progress through. Alexander Albon, so unfortunate there, had absolutely nowhere to go, using the extreme width of the racetrack in the Williams to try to clear the Ferrari of Carlos Sainz, and couldn't have done any more. He really couldn't.
And in Sainz hitting the Williams, that has put Albon's day to bed, unfortunately. Perhaps teammates next year at that Williams team. Sainz looking for a drive, and Albon just nowhere to go, speared into the wall. Not the way he would wanted to end his race. Okay, it's lap 56 of 70 of the Canadian Grand Prix. Safety car out. Verstappen leads this race. Hasn't come into the pits to utilise and get another set of tyres on. Neither have Norris and Piastri. They're in 2nd and 3rd. Russell and Hamilton in 4th and 5th in the two Mercedes have. They had a free pit stop. They came in for a free tyre change. They're going to be on fresher rubber. Alonso is 6th. Stroll, Tsunoda, Ocon, Ricciardo is the top 10. They are your point scorers.
And Lando, another weather update. We don't see anything on the radar, but big showers are popping up around, so we can't rule it out.
There's more twists and turns yet in this Canadian Grand Prix. Gasly is 11th ahead of Hülkenberg, Bottas, Magnussen and Zhou Guanyu. The 15 remaining cars in this race. We've lost Sainz, Albon, Perez, Leclerc and Sargent. There's a lot of attrition here this afternoon, Andrew.
So according to Pirelli's data on the tyres degrade by 0.07 seconds a lap. That's the medium tyre, which Max Verstappen, the race leader's got on his car, and the two McLarens. Those tyres on the Red Bull and the McLarens are 10 laps older than the Mercedes tyres, so that's 0.7 of a second advantage per lap in pace the Mercedes should have.
In theory, yes. I mean, where they're getting that data from, I don't know, because we barely had any dry running before the race started. But it's going to be an interesting one, certainly. To your point, Andrew, interesting that the Mercedes have chosen to split the strategies there, which will give you a feel for the hedging of the bets against that potential tyre degradation. So they obviously agree.
Lapped cars may now overtake the safety car. That is in the form of Zhou Guanyu. So while he does that, then we'll expect the safety car to come in shortly. One man we have lost from this race is the Ferrari driver of Charles Leclerc. It's been a difficult day for both him and his teammate Sainz. Let's hear what Leclerc has to say.
Well, Charles, first things first, your race, obviously serious issues with your engine. What was actually wrong with it?
I don't know yet. I know, I could feel that there was 1.3 seconds slower in the straights. That's the only thing really. The car wasn't going forward in the straights, and I was just a passenger of that. I had so many different changes I had to do on my steering wheel to try and keep it at that level and not make it worse, but it was very frustrating because for driving in those conditions it's always super difficult to do it to do that on its own, and plus obviously what was happening on the engine, it wasn't great.
Where's this come from? It's been a problem you've had during the weekend, or it was just during the race?
No, not at all. No, it's the first time I've had that, so I don't know from where it's coming from yet.
And you retired to save that engine, or do you think that engine is over and you'll have to take another one at some point in the season?
I'm not sure yet. I think honestly, considering the pace and everything that had happened, I think it was the right choice, whether it was for the engine that was worsening or I don't know.
Okay, thank you very much. Bad luck.
Tough day at the office for Charles Leclerc and Ferrari. Okay, we'll get one more lap behind the safety car. It's coming in at the end of this lap. Action all throughout this race for the Canadian Grand Prix. And of course, the action really ramps up in the football world next week. The Euros, of course, getting underway on Friday. England stepping up to the international stage once again. Our 5 Live coverage ramps up, though, from Monday with the Football Daily podcast. The biggest names, all of the analysis and debate you'll need throughout the tournament. Just search Football Daily on BBC Sounds. You're listening right now to live coverage of the Canadian Grand Prix. It's lap 58 of 70. Alongside myself, Harry Benjamin is the European Sports Car Champion, Alex Brundle. And Alex, this has been a chaotic race so far, and we still don't know how this is going to end.
Give the circuit just a tad of lubrication, and we get an incredible Grand Prix every single time. Safety car going to be coming in this lap. 58 of 70 laps completed. 2 Mercedes on new sets of tyres. They're the only drivers in the field beyond, well, in the running at least, who took a new set of tyres last time around in terms of safety cars. Max Verstappen leads the field with the 2 McLarens following just behind. This is going to be a thrilling race to the finish with incredible variance in the performance of the cars throughout conditions and race distance. We go racing again in a few moments' time.
Max Verstappen in the Red Bull, the 2 McLarens of Norris and Piastri, the 2 Mercedes of Russell and Hamilton. Don't rule out Fernando Alonso in the Aston Martin either. That is your top 6 in this race as we're about to go green flag racing again. It's lap 58 of 70. It's the 2 Mercedes, perhaps with the advantage of fresher rubber than the 3 cars in front of them. But it's Verstappen who has the advantage of being at the head of the field as he weaves left and right, leaving it as late as possible before he puts his foot to the floor. And we go racing again. He's approaching the chicane now, and that is when he goes through the right, then the left, arcs out onto the main straight. Verstappen is gone. Norris follows him through, but it's a good restart from Verstappen. Actually, a bit of a gap between himself and Norris as they break for turn 1. There is still a wet patch off of the dry line, particularly through turns 1 and 2, the left hand, and then into the right as you head uphill towards 3 and 4.
Verstappen really caught Norris napping on that restart. Piastri was right underneath the gearbox of the sister McLaren. Verstappen went and he's dropped Norris by 1.3 seconds in the first sector alone. Really struggling to keep pace then, Lando Norris, and he's given Max Verstappen a massive buffer in this final phase of the race.
And that is not what Mercedes needed. They needed to be right there with him. Mercedes of Russell in 4th, 3 seconds back, and then Hamilton tucked in right behind his teammate in 5th. Then comes Alonso. Stroll is 7th ahead of Tsunoda. Ocon, Ricciardo, the top 10. Then it's Gasly, Hülkenberg, Bottas, Magnussen and Zhou, the 15 drivers that remain in this race. No Sainz, no Albon, no Perez, no Leclerc, and no Sargent. They have all retired.
Circuit conditions now fully dry from the exit of turn 4 and 5 all the way through to the start-finish straight, but it's still a very narrow dry line through turns 1 and 2. The slick tyre, the tyre that everybody's on, but it's a tyre which does not work on those wet areas of the racetrack, and drivers having to be so tentative and so careful through the early part of the lap, which they're navigating now.
It is playing into Max Verstappen's hands rather nicely. The Dutchman who has said this weekend that, well, the Red Bull team need to have a cleaner weekend. They've been plagued with problems. All teams have been down on track action throughout practice on Friday and Saturday due to the varied conditions and the wet weather. But of course, an ERS issue with Max Verstappen. That is the energy recovery system. A problem with that in practice, calling for changes to be made in the back of that Red Bull car. Verstappen far from comfortable, far from the dominant man we have seen him be over the last couple of years. But that's how it's playing out at the moment in Formula One. It's not the dominance we all thought we'd get way back at the start of the season in Bahrain. Verstappen's won, Sainz has won, Norris has won, Leclerc has won. Could we get a 5th different winner in 2024 come the end of the next 10 laps.
Listening in to George Russell, one half of the first absolute dead heat in qualifying we've seen for a very, very long time. Since 1997 in Formula One, we went to 3 decimal places in terms of qualifying performance, qualifying evaluation. Sits in 4th position at the moment, and well behind the 2 McLarens. Kevin Magnussen is the car we're listening into, heading across the mid-corner of turn 3 and 4, as Russell was the fastest car of the leading 4 last time around. Magnussen a little bit too fast then, down towards actually 7 and 8 towards the end of the lap, isn't it?
Yeah, further up the field with 10 laps to go. George Russell is flying on the medium compounded tyre in that Mercedes. He's just set the fastest lap of the race, a 1:17.1, and he is all over the back of Oscar Piastri, almost half a second between those two. Verstappen and Norris, though. Verstappen, who leads this race, has just over a 2-second buffer. Let's see how it all plays out in these final stages of the Canadian Grand Prix. But before we do that, let's check in with the T20 Cricket World Cup action. Scotland, Oman. Charlie Taylor.
Well, the question, it looks like at the moment, is going to be when Scotland win this rather than if. And that is important because that will impact net run rate. This is how they decide which team finishes above which if they both finish on the same amount of points. The way things are going, it could be in this group that Scotland and England finish on the same amount of points. So Scotland are trying to get this done as soon as possible. We're only 11 overs in, so there's still 9 to play with. And Scotland now only need 32 runs to win. So they are hitting lots of boundaries, taking lots of risks, that means. But if they can get this done very quickly, it will impact their net run rate very nicely indeed and put England under a bit of pressure. Full commentary continues on the BBC Sport app and website.
Thanks, Charlie. Yeah, and a lot of pressure being applied here on all of the 15 remaining drivers in this Canadian Grand Prix, but particularly now on the McLaren of Oscar Piastri, who has the much quicker Mercedes all over the back of him as they head towards turn 8 and 9. Through the right-hander, then the left-hander. Russell 0.4 of a second within Piastri.
Time's running out for Russell, though, Harry. The problem he's got a DRS trainer. The previous lap, Piastri had the DRS on Norris. So Russell.
Oh, he's having a look though down the inside. Andrew tries to get alongside Piastri. It's going to be a traction race down the back straight. Russell will get the effect of DRS, but so too will Piastri. The flap in the rear wing opens, giving you a little extra boost. It's side by side. It's wheel to wheel for Russell and Piastri. Piastri will have the inside coming into the chicane. The McLaren holds on. The Mercedes of Russell has to bide his time once again. Lap 63 of 70.
But it's double DRS for Russell down towards turn 1. Fastest lap of the race so far for Max Verstappen, disappearing out front, and that has a major bearing on this race because Lando Norris lost the DRS, was under pressure from Piastri.
Oscar requests to hold position. Do you think you could challenge Verstappen? He was 17.4 last lap.
I need to focus on keeping Russell behind. Just leave it to it.
And that's the discussion going on at McLaren. It's whether they want to move Piastri past Norris. They've decided not to, but in doing so, they put Piastri under pressure from George Russell. Half a second the gap, with a double DRS dose for Russell potentially coming down that back straight and then down towards turn 1.
Piastri happy to play the team game for McLaren. Took his first podium of the year in Monaco a couple of weeks ago, did Piastri, in now upgraded McLarens over the last few races. They have come alive once more. Andrea Stella, the team principal of that team, doing a superb job. Piastri, though, doing a superb job defending from Russell, though, as they come into the chicane. It's side by side, there's contact. Russell has to cut the chicane. Piastri at the inside line. Russell had to turn in and didn't bail out until the very last minute. There was contact, but they keep on going. Hamilton goes through on his teammate, though. It's Piastri third, Hamilton fourth, Russell now down to fifth. Has that cost the possibility of the race win for George Russell?
Significant contact between the two of them on the apex of turn 13. I'd like to see that one again. Lewis Hamilton sweeps through on his teammate on that hard compound tyre and has had decent pace. So it was Russell trying to make his way around the outside of turn 13. Piastri having none of it, stays on the apex, and I don't think that Oscar Piastri has done anything wrong there. He's taken the apex, there's not enough space. Piastri on the extreme right of the racetrack bounces over the curb at a sensible speed. I don't think George Russell was ever going to make it round the outside of turn 13.
Is that frustration from Russell showing there, do you think?
I think it's just the move that he wanted to make. He wanted to take that final place on the podium. He knows it's going to be difficult down towards turn 1 because it's wet on the road, and to be offline down there necessitates a severe grip loss. That's the place where he was able to do it. He couldn't quite get the overspeed. I think underestimated how far he was past Piastri on the inside.
Neither Mercedes has been able to take a podium position in a Grand Prix so far this season. They find themselves right on the fringes. Hamilton now in 4th, 6/10 behind Piastri. Then comes Russell. Alonso is 6th. Then comes Stroll in 7th. Ocon. Then there's a great battle between Tsunoda in 9th, his teammate Ricciardo. Then it's Gasly, Hülkenberg, Bottas, Magnussen and Joe. Ricciardo fighting his teammate Tsunoda, and he has been told, you can't fight with Yuki.
Two drivers with a lot to say behind the wheel of RB, Red Bull's junior team. Just Perez just re-signed for the sister team, for the team that is up the ladder from these two drivers overlooked for that potential position, and both of them want to come out on top, both sitting though at the moment in the points, valuable points for a team like RB.
Massively valuable points, who currently sit on 24 points. Their fight is with Haas at the moment, who don't look like they're scoring anything. That's in the lower half of the constructors. Tsunoda, of course, just re-signing for an extra year with RB. Hamilton, though, through and up into the podium positions. Down the back straight with DRS. Slides by Oscar Piastri out of the chicane with 5 laps to go. Hamilton's on the podium. Piastri down to 4.
Fastest lap of the race with a DRS for Lewis Hamilton. That came from absolutely nowhere. And that hard tyre working nicely for Hamilton. Piastri struggling for pace, isn't he? And he's falling back into the clutches of George Russell once more.
Hamilton, fastest lap of this race. He's now 1.9 seconds behind Lando Norris. It's lap 66 of 70 of the Canadian Grand Prix at the Circuit Gilles Villeneuve in Montreal. Verstappen leads by over 3 seconds. Then it's Hamilton in 3rd. Piastri, Russell the top 5. Alonso, Stroll, the 2 Aston Martins with actually a quietly very good race in 6th and 7th. Ocon is 8th. Tsunoda, and the final point currently going to his teammate Ricciardo in the 2nd RB. That is the top 10. But is the battle for the win falling away now for the likes of Lando Norris, the likes of Lewis Hamilton, Oscar Piastri and George Russell, who now finds himself still stuck behind Piastri? How frustrated will he be to have seen his teammate get past the Aussie? He has not been able to do so. Will he be able to do it now? Down the back straight with DRS, the rear wing flies open into the braking zone. Russell finally through on Piastri. Russell out of the chicane and up into 4th. Piastri down to 5th as we start lap 67 of 70.
Yellow flag out in sector 2, and it's been out for some time. We've not seen the incident yet. Now cleared to green, so whatever it was has managed to be cleared. Piastri without the pace, just unable to keep with the Mercedes. And it was Yuki Tsunoda who had a great big spin and was so nearly collected by the Haas of Nico Hülkenberg as he made his way through.
Sliding across the grass, he was lucky to miss the wall initially, slid back onto the track and just avoided being absolutely collected by the cars behind him. His teammate made it through, but the Haas of Magnussen by a whisker also made it through. He's also brought debris onto the track too. Such a shame for Tsunoda, a small mistake causing him to go off into the grass and out of a points-paying position.
Both either side, and such lightning reactions there to be able to miss Tsunoda, who managed to recover the car. It's now Russell who has DRS on Lewis Hamilton. 4/10 the gap between the two Mercedes drivers. Great positioning here for a Mercedes who've been in the doldrums for the first part of this year. What do they choose to do with these two cars?
3 laps to go. Russell has so far outraced Lewis Hamilton 5 times this year. Will Hamilton, who was on that harder compound of tyre, technically the slower compound of tyre compared to George Russell's mediums, will he even be asked to play the team game? Hamilton is about 2 seconds behind Lando Norris, who is in second. Russell is fourth.
Lando, it looks like a lot of debris to me.
Yes, someone's going to get a puncture from this. It's all over the track.
Dear race director, safety car to the end, please, says Lando Norris, who's in a very good position for McLaren and is not going to be able to catch Max Verstappen at this stage without the intervention of the safety car, or indeed at all, even if there is one, because we're moving in to the final laps of the race. There is a decent amount of debris towards that section of the racetrack. Lewis Hamilton, the joint most successful driver around this venue, repelling, though, the attentions of his teammate, who's had super pace, but not the racecraft to get to where that pace really deserves so far.
Lewis Hamilton, a 6-time winner around this track. Here comes Russell.
We are racing. Just remember, it goes without saying, keep it clean, please.
And as the radio message comes through, Russell dives down the inside into the final chicane, comes out on top, and then Hamilton tries to fight back with DRS down towards turn 1, but can't do it. The fight was on, and Russell won out. Russell now third, and onto that final spot on the podium. Hamilton down to fourth.
Hamilton shaping to the inside, down towards turn 1, found the wet section of the racetrack and just couldn't do anything about Russell. The overspeed on the DRS for George Russell. He managed to find the inside down into turn 13, so brave on the brakes over a wet patch which flew off the inside right of George Russell's car, and then managed to defend the position over the damp stuff down towards turn 1. Russell past Hamilton and up onto the podium in the Mercedes.
Bold and brave for George Russell. It's now Verstappen who leads, Norris second, Russell is third ahead of Hamilton, Piastri the top 5, Alonso and Stroll, the 2 Aston Martins, in 6th and 7th. Then comes Daniel Ricciardo, and thanks to the RB of Tsunoda's mistake, he's fallen all the way to the back. That has allowed Esteban Ocon up into 9th and Pierre Gasly in 10th. The 2 Alpines staring down the barrel of a double points finish.
Strength of Verstappen out front, fastest driver through this stint, has a decent gap back now to Lando Norris as we move into this final lap. Turn 13 incident involving Russell and Piastri will be investigated after the race, and that's an interesting one as the race continues on and the battle continues on between the 2 Mercedes.
Yeah, we'll keep an eye on that one, whether the stewards weren't too happy with how close Russell got to Piastri making that move into the final chicane.
Yeah, a bit of contact wasn't there between the 2 of them down in turn 13. Both continued and lived to fight another day. George Russell forced to take evasive action over the chicane, but I wouldn't expect to see any kind of penalty for that one. I think both drivers acted reasonably sensibly, just the move not on for that George Russell on that occasion.
Coming then to the end of this race, we're halfway through the final lap, just outside of the points. The 2 Haas drivers, Hülkenberg ahead of Magnussen, 11th and 12th, Bottas 13th, Tsunoda with that mistake now down to 14th, Joe 15th and last of the remaining cars. No signs, Albon, Perez, Leclerc or Sargent. But with just 2 more corners to go in what has been a tough race to read for everybody, it's Red Bull and Max Verstappen who come out on top, and it's 3 wins in Canada for Max Verstappen, who wins the Canadian Grand Prix. Lando Norris will line up on the podium alongside in second, and it's George Russell with his best Grand Prix finish of the year in third for Mercedes. He started this race on pole, he'll have to settle for third. Hamilton fourth, Piastri rounds out the top 5, then it's Alonso and the homeboy Stroll in 7th. Daniel Ricciardo to the line, just pips the 2 Alpines of Gasly and Ocon, and then come the rest of the field outside of the points. Hülkenberg, Magnussen, Bottas, Tsunoda and Zhou Guanyu, the 15 finishers in this race, with the rest retirements. But here is your race winner.
Great job, Max. What a race. Kept you on your toes.
Well done, Max. That was quite a drive. Quite a drive. Got the calls right at the right time. Got onto the slicks at the right time. So, well done.
Yes. What a race, guys. Not easy, but we did it. Great job, everyone. Yeah, great on right calls. So, yeah, congrats. Really, really good. Oh, nice. I enjoyed that one.
Max Verstappen, the winner of the Canadian Grand Prix, Alex, and he said it right there. They made all the right calls.
Right tyre at the right time, but he also had the pace at the right time. End of the race, everything was neutralised, and Max Verstappen found speed that he didn't have for the rest of the race distance to launch away from Lando Norris by almost 4 seconds at the flag. Outstanding. Where did that come from? When McLaren have been putting them under so much pressure, Mercedes have been putting them under so much pressure for the full race distance. That really was a champion's drive, you must admit, from Max Verstappen, who found a turn of speed I really didn't think he would through to the end.
It certainly was, and all of the grandstands up on their feet, the people in the grandstands up on their feet applauding Max Verstappen for that win. Don't go anywhere, we'll be keeping the coverage going here on 5 Live for the Canadian Grand Prix, but let's check in quickly with the cricket. India-Pakistan, Dan Norcross.
India have won it. They've won by 6 runs in a very dramatic finish, and all thanks to Jasprit Bumrah. He took 3 for 14 in 4 overs to stall Pakistan, who looked like they were cruising to victory. At the halfway stage, they just needed 63 of 10 overs with 9 wickets in hand, but somehow Bumrah managed to stall them. And 17 off the last over was just too much. There was a moment when Naseem Shah nearly got the 6 he needed off the penultimate ball to keep the match alive, but ultimately 8 off the last ball was never going to happen. It's really bad news for Pakistan. They've now lost 2 out of 2. It's fabulous news for India. They do what they always do in World Cups. They've beaten Pakistan, and they've won 2 out of 2. In the end, it's India by 6 runs.
Thanks, Dan. India doing all they usually do, and Max Verstappen doing all he usually does. Rosanna standing tall, the winner of the Canadian Grand Prix. But that, as Alex said, was a champion's drive.
It really was, wasn't it? And Max Verstappen has just jumped out of his RB20 Red Bull car and he's diving into the arms of his mechanics. They're patting on the back, patting on the helmet as well. Red Bull really chuffed with that performance, and I think it was a performance we weren't necessarily expecting today, guys.
No, not at all. He's been struggling all weekend, the Red Bull and Verstappen, with those ERS issues, with the curb issues as well. But in a race like this, the driver can make the difference.
A bizarre thing to say, but an unexpected victory for Max Verstappen at this stage. A brilliant drive eventually. I really thought the McLarens were going to come back at him through the second part of the race. They've been so fast in the early stages on that intermediate tyre, but once he got onto the slick, he'd done his little bit of talking over the radio about how difficult the car was to manage. He just settled and took off from that final restart. The management of that really won him the event here today. He put that critical DRS distance into Lando Norris and left them battling and squabbling behind.
The race looks like it has taken it out of Lando Norris. He's having a chat with some of his mechanics. But just going back to Verstappen's woes during that race, talking about a lock suspension that he was having to deal with again. He made that point over the radio. Alex, driving around that kind of issue to then take the victory, he's obviously had to work really hard for it today.
I think it's just a comment on the continuing issues they've been having at Red Bull, from the way that front geometry, the way that front suspension works. They have challenges every weekend, but what you can see is when they get the car in the right window, they do have the aerodynamic efficiency, but I think the main thing that we've seen today is Max Verstappen's ability to shrug off pressure and deliver when it matters, in comparison, for example, to teammate Sergio Perez, who found himself in the wall with issues, with damage. Verstappen soaked it all up, soaked up the issues, got on with the job and made it happen today for a team who, unlike so many races that we've seen, were not the dominant force. He still managed to grab the victory. Impressive stuff.
Awkwardly, Sergio Perez has just walked past me. Luckily, he's not dialed in to BBC Radio 5 Live currently. He's busy talking to the media, but a really disappointing day for the Mexican driver, unable to back up his teammates' performance yet again, I hasten to add. And George Russell looking very disappointed, thinking, I'm sure, about what might have been today. P3 for the British driver, but I'm sure he thought the win was on, starting from pole position, guys.
I'm sure he did. I mean, look, the way the race started in these really tough conditions, all drivers know that anything can happen across the 70 laps that we did get. And it was a chaotic race, 2 safety cars as well. But you know what? There were a few mistakes that crept in for Russell this afternoon where others didn't make those mistakes.
I think he'll relive that moment where he tried to get around the outside of Oscar Piastri in turn 13 and think, how much time did I lose there? I had to breathe to manage letting through my teammate Lewis Hamilton, or indeed my teammate ended up back in front of me. I had the speed, but the race could have played out better, particularly in those closing stages. Was there a little bit of damage as a result of that contact as well? He carried through to the end of the race. Again, a race for Russell, and I feel like we've said this a couple of times now, where he had the speed but just couldn't deliver it in terms of the ultimate result. A second or even a win, potentially not a win actually, Verstappen was a bit too fast, but definitely a second was on the cards for him today.
It's interesting. Andrew Benson, our F1 correspondent at the BBC yesterday, saying how there were going to be different approaches to this race, with George Russell looking for his first win in a long time, with Max Verstappen saying he wasn't stressed about the race today. He's lining up in P2. He's got a championship lead to protect. Do you think George Russell was just going at it too bullishly? Perhaps he was just so desperate to get that win that was why those mistakes crept in.
I think that's a harsh view to take. He had made it. Well, no, but you're playing devil's advocate. But in these kind of conditions, they almost promote those kind of mistakes, the smallest of mistakes. So yes, those around him, okay, didn't make them, but it was always going to happen. I don't think this was Russell sort of getting all flustered and not capable. Or do you disagree with me, Alex?
I think he tried to snatch the opportunity. I mean, we saw with the wheel-to-wheel battle with his teammate Lewis Hamilton that the move down to 1 was not a thing. There was still too much water offline, so he knew that opportunity down towards turn 13 was all he was going to get. Didn't want to wait another lap and ended up jumping across the chicane. Of course, then you make the tyres wet and then have further issues. So I think he sees glory, he sees the opportunity. Of course, he did manage to score Mercedes' first podium finish in a Grand Prix this year, but he sees that in front of him and grasps for it a little bit too hard. So often the case when you've not had the opportunity, when you've not had the car underneath you to deliver those results, that when the result is on the road in front of you, it's too easy to grab for it before it's really ripe for the picking.
What do we say then if we take a step back and look at the results as a whole this weekend, with the Mercedes finishing P3 and P4, Russell ahead of Hamilton, with this upgraded front wing, the upgraded package now obviously performing pretty well? Can we count on them as podium finishers for the upcoming races as well now, Harry?
I think we can say that. I think they are back in the mix. There will be some circuits that play to their advantage and some that play to others. But the fact that this is, the first podium for Russell this year, the first podium for Mercedes this season, and we're, what are we at? We're at round 9 of 24. They finally got an upgrade. We've had these false starts before over the last couple of years where it hasn't played out, but they've incrementally been bringing more and more upgrades over the last couple of races, particularly around the front wing and the nose and the suspension. And they feel like they finally they've used this term before, the North Star. I think they have finally found the beginnings of it, and they'll only improve. And I think this will still give them a lot of confidence. It was a tough race, a chaotic race, mixed conditions galore. Is always going to throw up some difficult choices to be made. I think Russell and Hamilton and Mercedes are back and in the hunt.
Well, that is exciting stuff to have another team challenging right at the sharp end of the grid. And Alex, as a driver, watching these 20 drivers take on a circuit like the circuit Gilles Villeneuve in these conditions, how much harder are they working out there than we really kind of appreciate as mere mortals that just poodle around in road cars?
Well, they're mere mortals too, and that's why it's incredible to see such outstanding skill on display. That's Formula One at its best. That's racing at its best. And I think that Grand Prix, from a neutral perspective, from a fan perspective, really did deliver, didn't it?
It really did. We have several race leaders. It was, in the end, though, Max Verstappen in the Red Bull who took the spoils after a really difficult start to the weekend. Remember, in FP2, his car was up on the jacks with an electrical fault. That may come back to haunt Red Bull later in the season with an engine penalty. But for now, Max Verstappen is making the headlines. He has finished ahead of Lando Norris and George Russell. A really exciting Grand Prix here in Canada. My thanks to Harry Benjamin, Alex Brundle and Andrew Benson for talking us through through the 70 laps of the Canadian Grand Prix. We will analyse it in the Checkered Flag podcast, so do check that out. Up next, it's the Match of the Day Top 10. But first, let's get your latest news with Nick Hatfield.